I want to welcome you to this episode of the Retro Rogues Live. You're probably watching, hopefully, on Facebook or Twitter or Twitch. Or is that just that nervousness in my leg because one of our news articles? Anyhow, I want to welcome you to this episode. I hope you're either listening or watching and you're comfortable at home. Maybe you got something interesting, an adult beverage you're enjoying. Because I want to mention, warning, as the graphic here clearly demonstrates and shows, the Retro Rogues Live show is intended for an adult audience and not intended for children under the age of 13. Parental discretion is advised. We may curse to even reinforce this concept. I want to welcome to the show. My name is Dave Beatty. I'm one of your hosts. I've been a professional illustrator and graphic designer for nearly 30 years. Worked on a lot of fun things some people have heard of, such as Batman Incorporated, Justice League of America, and even some things maybe you're not too terribly familiar with, things like Irredeemable, or even I worked on some titles actually for Aspen once upon a time. But enough about that. I want to welcome back my co-host. This is Mr. Eric Alexander. You can see him with his evil avatar there, sort of an evil Sith knight creature-looking guy. Eric, please tell the folks either watching or listening at home some of the fun things that you've worked on as a creative professional.
Yes, hello, everyone. I am Eric Alexander, and I am the co-host for the Retro Rogues Live. I am the chief financial officer for a small production company in Arizona called Bad Bob Productions. And I am also the associate producer of the feature film Occupants, which features Star Trek Voyager actor Robert Picardo and is currently streaming on Tubi.
Very cool. We're going to lead off the episode here with a little bit of personal stuff. So just so people know, a new page, believe it or not, hold the applause. Don't be too shocked. But after a very long hiatus, a new page is up on the Red Skirts Online webcomic. You can go there and read it there. We are starting our updates up again. 2020 is going to be a big year for Red Skirts. I'm not going to tell you everything going on, but there's a lot of exciting things that's going to be happening with Red Skirts. New pages, a brand new story is going to be starting up. We've got a quick epilogue sequence. Here is just a small snippet from the first page. Obviously, they're back in our version of 10 Forward, which is oddly relevant, actually, for what we're going to be talking about tonight. But anyhow, definitely check it out. Red Skirts is a sort of a Star Trek parody webcomic, but it's also a love letter to all those great science fiction TV shows a lot of us grew up with, things from the 60s, 70s, 80s, and even slightly influenced by things from the 90s. So I encourage you to go check that out. That's at redskirtsonline.com, redskirtsonline.com. But enough about that. Let's move on to our pop culture news segment. Oh, wait, let me take that back. Eric, you've got some news. I apologize.
Oh, no, that's okay. I just always like to kind of put it out there that, yeah, I am involved with a film production company here in Arizona. We are working on a trailer it's a proof of concept trailer for a film called The Walk of Karma. And we finished all of our principal photography last year. So we're going to be editing it, and hopefully you folks will be seeing something very soon.
Very cool. I'm very excited about that. I want to apologize. I didn't mean to jump the gun. We just have so much in the pop culture news. I'm chomping at a bit to get to it.
We've got a lot.
Yeah, but I'm very excited for everyone to see what Eric's been working on. It's very, very cool. His production company's got something fun cooked up, some really amazing and gruesome makeup effects I've seen, some really amazing images from it. It's going to be something else. So I'm excited for it. And you, dear viewer or listener, you should be excited for it too. So we're going to move now into our pop culture news segment. We're going to start off actually talking about the road less traveled to Picard. That's the name of this episode. But we're going to start off with some Picard news. Please, Eric, tell me, what fun things have you discovered on the internet about Picard?
Well, there's been quite a bit of Picard news, and I thought I would just start out with this. It's a very short article, but it is from Reuters. Reuters, of course, is a huge news service that basically gives all sorts of news all over the world. And they have an article that is dated January 15th, so very topical, very today. And it says, Star Trek return irresistible Patrick Stewart at new series premiere. This is from the London premiere. Sir Patrick Stewart said returning to Star Trek was irresistible as he led a new generation of cast members down the red carpet for the premiere of a series devoted to his much-loved character, Jean-Luc Picard. And It says the 79-year-old British actor had repeatedly refused efforts to lure him back to the starship Captain Picard. But the writers of this latest chapter of Star Trek Picard helped change his mind to the delight of science fiction fans, and his character is due back on screens later this month after a two-decade break. So, of course, that's what the buzz for us, but I just thought it was interesting that Reuters was actually commenting on this. This is a pretty good cast photo right here from the London premiere. We can see the lovely Jerry Ryan right next to Patrick Stewart, and oh my God, she's hot. I've met her in person. She is awesome. So I'm glad she was there, that she made it. They also did a premiere in Hollywood as well. I think the Hollywood premiere was first. Let me pull that one up. You share screens sometimes take me a little bit, but this is a sort of a fun thing. This is from the Hollywood premiere. This is a Variety article that was dated January 14th. So yes, it appears the Hollywood premiere was before the London premiere. It says Picard stars reveal which Star Trek characters they would get drunk with. And there's a lovely picture here of Marina Sirtis with Patrick Stewart, Gates McFadden, and Brent Spiner. So they all attended the initial premiere in Hollywood. And I have to say, Gates McFadden looks very good in this picture. Yeah, they're all sitting there together. I thought it was a little weird, though, that it didn't look like Jonathan Frakes was there, which is kind of weird because Frakes is not only in Picard, but he directed at least one episode. So I'm kind of wondering what that's all about. Maybe he's just busy. Maybe he's off doing something. Or I don't know if people know this, but he was supposed to be at San Diego Comic-Con when they released the trailer, and he missed his flight. So could have been something like that, too, that does happen. But it says the cast and creators of Star Trek Picard turned out for the show's premiere at the ArcLight Cinerama Dome on Monday night. In the spirit of the festive atmosphere of the night, Variety asked them which Star Trek character, past or present, they'd most like to pound a few Romulan ales with at the local 10 Forward. We were just talking about 10 Forward, right?
Yeah. So
Sirius star Patrick Stewart had perhaps the best response of the night when he said, "Your question suggests that hasn't happened yet." So, of course, he knows everybody, right? So he's already probably pounded a few beers with his favorite character. Says there are a lot of new characters with me now, and they are without exception delightful people, he continued. So a glass or two of something pleasant with any of them would be a treat. This was the best response, I thought, because they went to executive producer Rod Roddenberry. I think people sometimes forget that Rod Roddenberry, the son of Gene Roddenberry, is an executive producer for Picard, as well as Discovery. And it said, executive producer Rod Roddenberry, the son of Star Trek creator Gene Roddenberry, had a rather poignant answer. And he said, "My dad." He said, "I know that's not what you were asking, but that's who I'd most like to hang out with." So that's pretty cool. Yeah. As far as some of the other answers and stuff here, I don't think they gave any more answers. But they did mention, obviously, that some of the other cast members were there. Marina Sirtis, Brent Spiner, Gates McFadden, they made it. There's some nice pictures here. This is Patrick Stewart, obviously, with Jerry Ryan and Brent Spiner. So kind of a fun thing for the Hollywood and the London premieres of Star Trek Picard. And then I have one more, I think, fun article here. This one is related to Brent Spiner and his return as Data. So this is from Sci-Fi Wire. And it says, Brent Spiner says Data's return on Picard hinged on not undoing his Star Trek nemesis' death. Now, the funny thing is, there are still people, I think, when I'm looking at people talking on Twitter and on the internet, I think there are still people that are confused by this. So this might provide a little clarification for people that are still confused about Data's return. It says, we're about a week away from the world premiere of Star Trek Picard on CBS All Access. Despite being the entire draw of the series, Patrick Stewart won't be the only familiar face from the next generation to reprise a beloved character. The likes of Jonathan Frakes and Brent Spiner are also coming back to play their famous TNG roles. When it comes to Data, however, the Goldskin android is still dead after selflessly giving up his life in the 2002 feature film Star Trek Nemesis. The absence of Data plays a major part in Jean-Luc's character arc on the new show. His death still haunts Stewart's former starship captain, which meant there could be no cheap reconting or resurrections. Says this is a quote, "It was definitely important that we didn't do anything that would undermine anything that had been done before. But I think when you see the whole season, I couldn't say anything else." Spotner told Sci-Fi Wire at the show's red carpet premiere before becoming particularly tight-lipped. So it sounds like he almost slipped and said something that he wasn't supposed to say about maybe the end of the season. And that's something we can speculate. It says, funnily enough, the poor reception of Nemesis was one of the many reasons Sir Patrick was open to return to the world of Star Trek. Inspired by James Mangold's Logan, he felt that the next generation deserved a better send-off than it got. The producers and writers of the show are really brilliant, continued Spiner. There was Patrick, which was a huge draw because I love Patrick and love working with him. It was strange and wonderful and just curious. I remember when we shot the first scene in the show, the very first shot, and we were sitting across from each other going, "Can you believe this?" Picard has already scored a rare renewal for a second season, which is already being mapped out with new showrunner Terry Matalas from 12 Monkeys, alongside co-showrunner Michael Chabon, according to executive producer Heather Kadeen. I think by the end of this season, people are going to step away and feel like, wow, this is a family I really want to watch. Where do we go from here? Kadeen said. I think as you kind of get from the pilot, Picard has to assemble a new crew. He has to make a whole new bridge crew family. And so where do we go from there is really where our jumping off point is for season 2. So anyway, obviously the main part of that article is that, yes, for anybody that is still speculating, Data is still dead. They're not resurrecting Data. My speculation, and from the teasers and everything like that, is that Data is essentially in Picard's mind. He is a reflection of Picard's memory of him and the sort of the guilt he probably feels from Data dying and all that. The disassembled Sunian android that we see that looks like Data is apparently probably B4, not Data. And B4 apparently has been disassembled and is no longer active. So we will see. There's all sorts of other things to speculate. It looked like I said in this article, that Brent Spiner almost said something he didn't want to say. My big hope has always been that he is going to actually reprise lore. I think that would be really cool, but we'll see.
It's interesting because a lot of this stuff that they're talking about is actually undoing not the current Countdown comic that we're reviewing here on the show. That's actually was a partial lead-in for Picard, but it actually is undoing a lot of the stuff that actually comes from the Countdown comic book series that actually led into the first of J.J. Abrams' films, the beginning of the Kelvin 9 timeline, the first Star Trek film, the new one that had Chris Pine and Zachary Quinto in it, because that Countdown comic, B4 has Data's memories. So it's essentially like Data is back, and he is actually the captain of the Enterprise in the Countdown comic book. So if Data is technically dead as of the end of Nemesis, then that basically retcons or does away with that Countdown comic book series that actually led into the first of the J.J. Abrams films.
Yeah, and it's funny because we are actually going to be talking about a comic book later on in our Road Less Traveled segment when we're talking about Picard and some things that have come before. And the thing is, I always try to tell people, when it comes to the comics, when it comes to the books, it always has to be taken with a grain of salt. Even when they tell you it's canon, guess what? The writers of the show don't care. The directors don't care. And they will do whatever they want, regardless of what the comic book says. In particular, with the Picard Countdown comic, I think the reason they're using the same name as the Kelvin one, the Kelvin prequel, is to basically, draw over it,
Yeah,
and
do away with it.
This is the new Countdown, which is very different. We've reviewed both the first and second issue of Countdown Picard. I'm not quite sure where that story is going at this point. There seems to be a whole lot going on, but we'll see. And again, you always just have to take the comics and the books, unfortunately, with a grain of salt. I'm not trying to be a jerk, but I tell people a lot of times it's like one step above fan fiction. When you start citing books and you start citing comics to me, I'm like, that's great. To me, that's just speculation because, again, Unfortunately, when it comes to the production teams of these shows, they don't read the comics, they don't read the books. They just don't. And so you assume that there's somebody at CBS All Access that's part of some sort of story group that's supposed to look at this stuff, but that might be assuming too much. I mean, you see it with
Yeah.
Lucasfilm and Kathleen Kennedy's famous quote that there is no source material. So
Right.
that kind of
Right.
shows you where this stuff goes sometimes. Now, I know with Star Trek Countdown, I believe one of the writers is actually credited as a writer for the comic. So that does give it a little bit more legitimacy, but that was the same situation with the previous Countdown. You
Right.
had one
Right.
of the screenwriters was involved in that comic book, and they're just getting rid of it.
Yeah.
So,
and along those lines, actually, if you could share my screen, there was a new Star Trek short trek that came out called Children of Mars. We want to talk about this briefly. This is going to be a spoiler, kind of a spoiler-filled conversation, just because I want to talk about how it ties into Picard and also the Countdown comic as well. This is relevant probably to both. And there's no way to really recap this short trek because it's a very short story without basically putting out spoilers. So you've been warned. I think if you can still watch it even after we discuss it, you'll still watch it and enjoy it because it's very well produced. So Children of Mars, new short trek that came out. You can watch it on CBS All Access. If you don't have CBS All Access, I'm going to recap it for you so you know what you need to have probably picked up. So as Eric mentioned, we are reviewing the Countdown comic that's being published by IDW, which is the lead-in for Picard. And this actually ties pretty much directly into Countdown comic and obviously Picard. The way that it ties in is we follow these two young girls as they're going to school. And I'm not exact. I think that they're going to school on Earth, but I'm not quite sure. I think it's Earth, but I'm a little vague on that. But both of these two young girls, they're actually having communications, visual communications with their parents. The red-haired girl there, her father actually works as some kind of inspector on a Mars orbital station, and then the alien girl right there, her mom actually works at the Utopia Planitia shipping yards where they build all the starships. Now we know from reading Countdown, and if you haven't, you can watch some of our previous episodes. But from Countdown, we know that Geordi LaForge is at Utopia Planitia and is overseeing the building of all these rescue ships that they're going to use to basically ferry the Romulan people from their planets to a safe zone of some kind or to another planet where they'll be safe within the Romulan Star Empire because their planet's going nova as depicted in, again, the J.J. Abrams, the first of the Kelvin Star Trek movies. Well, we see the children talking to their parents, and then we see the two kids. There's a rivalry between them. One of them's a bit of a bully, and they keep going back and forth at each other. And it's almost kind of like a music video, and it's set to a cover of We Can Be Heroes. And it's really well produced. Of all the short treks I've seen, and I mean all of them, this is the best short trek I think I've seen. It's very well produced. And it's interesting to see kind of like life in the Federation, kind of outside of sort of serving in Starfleet. Like a school, their headmaster's a Vulcan. It's really interesting. But these two girls, they end up having basically like a schoolyard, like near the locker room hall fight, like you see in school. And they seem to really kind of hate each other. And they're being kind of punished towards the end of this short trek. And they're kind of staring away from each other. And then there's an attack that takes place. And all these screens start showing this attack that's happening actually on Mars. So they actually attack the Mars orbital station and destroy it. And they're attacking the Utopia Planitia shipping yards, and you can see the ships being destroyed. Now, Eric, it is those triangular-shaped ships that we've been discussing that you were thinking were Romulan, and some of the images from this Children of Mars short trek are the ones that are in the trailer where you see them kind of, they're like flying down, like it looks like a space station or something, and they're attacking and blowing it up. That was all in this short trek. So it makes me fearful, one, about Geordi, because if the comic is canon, Geordi might have died during this story. Because it seems as though the Federation has no way to defend against whatever this is that's attacking. They don't tell us what it is. We don't know if it's Romulans. It doesn't make sense to me that it would be Romulans, though, because they're building these ships to basically get the Romulans, off of their planets and escort them to safety. And then towards the end of it, we see an image of Picard. It's kind of like a news thing, where they comment on, they have those military commanders and they're commenting, on what's happening, and he's quoted as saying it's, the attack is devastating. And it's just a very brief thing with him that kind of ties into this. But the image we see of Picard, where it looks like he's in 10 forward, and we see that planet with all the explosions. You and I had speculated that might have been the planet in the Countdown comic where the Romulans have this group of indigenous people that they basically enslaved. Well, that's actually Mars, according to this short trek. And all those explosions are the attack that's happening on Mars. So in the midst of the Federation essentially trying to mount a rescue mission to help out the Romulans, someone actually attacks the Federation and basically takes out Mars, destroys all the transport ships that they're going to use. It's pretty much a one-sided, devastating, we'll use the term here, devastating thing that happens. So it ties directly into the Countdown comic, but it also obviously is going to tie into Picard. But like I said, it was very well produced. It was a little shocking to see the Federation get hit like that, and it seemed like they had no way to counter it. Because you think at the Utopia Planitia shipyards, they maybe even have Federation starships that are, kind of out of dry dock that are maybe going through trial runs that could have actually helped, mount a defense of some kind. But it looks like they pretty much just get wiped out. So, yeah, so that's my review of Children of Mars and the way that I think obviously it ties into everything. And then Eric, I know you said you hadn't had a chance to see this, unfortunately, but you said you were aware of some of the spoilers that you'd heard for Children of Mars. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, first of all, I was really surprised to find out that this is sort of a prequel to Picard. When I first saw the trailer for this particular short trek, I was like, oh God, I was just like, what is this? And then I read an article about it, a spoiler-filled article of it, and I was like intrigued. I was like, okay, I'm looking forward to seeing this when I do get my, because I'll be doing that pretty soon. I'll be getting my account for CBS All Access because I do plan to watch Picard. We plan to review it here on the show. And I'm a big spoiler guy. I go out, I find spoilers without even wanting to. I was just looking at a Children of Mars review, and it happened to have all the spoilers in it. You touched on one of the big things that I noticed nobody else is really talking about, which is that in relation to the Countdown comics, which seem to be probably around the same era as this attack, according to the Countdown comics, Geordi is at the shipyards when they're attacked.
Right.
So we may get something in the last issue of Countdown that relates more to this, but it would be really interesting. I don't know if they're going to go there, but it would be really, it's hard for me to imagine that they would kill Geordi LaForge off screen. That basically, that's just going to be something that Picard references. But it could be a big explanation for why Picard is in the state that he's in. If Geordi was killed at the shipyards, Picard may feel responsible in some way for not doing more to protect him or whatever, Now, the other thing that was interesting is the spoiler that I read said they did identify the attackers.
Huh.
And they identified the attackers in this little news broadcast, which is the thing that we're sharing here. And supposedly they were rogue synths. You don't remember hearing that term?
Yes, I see synths, attack, whatever, but I didn't. I'll be honest with you. that part of this short trek is so subtle, it completely escaped me. So you said it was rogue synths?
Rogue synths. So we
And
assume
I'm
that
assuming
means
synthoids. So that makes me wonder if that goes back to that. Remember, we saw that looked like a factory where they were producing those Sung style androids. I'm assuming those would be synthoids then, right?
yeah, that's my assumption. So my assumption is that those triangle ships are in fact now they could still be Romulan, by the way, and here's the reason why. Not that the attack was by Romulans. I'm saying the ships could still be Romulan. The reason being that if you recall, I mentioned with one of the teasers, we can see the Borg cube that we assume is basically the base of operations for the Romulan experimentation on the Borg. We know that's going to be part of Star Trek Picard, is that the Romulans are experimenting on the Borg.
Right.
So we can see those triangle shaped ships that appear to be like guarding the Borg cube where the experimentation is going on. And my speculation is that what happened was the Romulans were basically doing experiments very much along the lines of what Laura was trying to do in Star Trek Next Generation. I think that's one of the reasons Hugh is also important and why Hugh is back. It's because what the Romulans were doing is trying to do what Laura was doing, which is sort of like combine the artificial Sung type androids with Borg technology. And what they've done is created sort of a new race of synths. And these synths are sort of being enslaved by the Romulans. The Romulans obviously want to use them for their own purposes. And my speculation is that they stole a large amount of Romulan ships in some sort of uprising or revolt, and that's why they destroyed the rescue fleet. It's because obviously they're essentially at war with the Romulans, so they don't want them to be rescued. You know what I mean?
Right.
So that's my speculation at this point, is that this rogue synth faction is obviously a Romulan experiment gone horribly wrong, and that now these guys hate the Romulans. They may even hate the Federation, but they certainly don't want the Federation to help the Romulans. So that's why I think it would make sense that they would attack them, especially attack the rescue fleet that was being built. And again, the thing that I'm really curious about is whether Geordi was there and he's dead, and that would be crazy, especially if they just do it off screen. It's just something referenced in the past, because we know in the Star Trek Picard timeline, Picard is no longer an admiral; he's retired.
Right.
This obviously occurs many years before, and it seems to align with the Countdown comic timeline. So this is pretty interesting. One other thing that I'll give a shout out to Starfleet Underground. They're a new podcast that just came out. I'm actually supposed to be on their show the week after Picard comes out. We're going to be talking about Star Trek Picard on that show as well. And they actually, one of the things they were talking about with this particular short trek was, are we going to see these two characters again grown up? Are these characters going to be relevant in Star Trek Picard? And are we going to see them, are one of these possibly part of Picard's new crew? Something along those lines, or will they be relevant later on? Will we see these two characters again grown up?
Right.
So I think that's kind of interesting as well. So yeah, but there was a lot. Apparently there was quite a bit in this short trek as far as stuff that relates to Star Trek Picard, and I'm pretty fascinated by it, especially if is Geordi dead? Is that part of why Picard left Starfleet? That would be crazy. That would be absolutely crazy if they did that, and we'll just have to see how they treat that, because I don't know. It's a big question mark for me. But apparently, we do know more about these triangle ships and what threat they bring, which is apparently there is a new rival group. There is a new faction in town in the Star Trek Picard era, and that is the Rogue Synths.
Wow, so they're gonna go the Blade Runner route. Okay.
Yeah, that's what I thought Blade Runner for a bit too. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's well, we'll see. Huh, okay. Yeah, I totally missed that. I'll be honest with you, I totally missed it. I caught Picard, commenting on it, I saw that, I recognized the planet, which is Mars, as the one from the trailer that's being destroyed. I know that's not the planet that we're following in Countdown. And then, of course, because of reading Countdown, we understand the significance of the ships that were under construction at the shipyards. And then, of course, because of the Countdown comic, we know that Geordi is there overseeing the construction of all those rescue ships. It's interesting, too, because, well, these things are so closely tied together. I can't imagine that they would throw away the idea that Geordi is there, because that would be like we started off talking about Data, that Data is, in the original Countdown comic, is the new captain of the Enterprise, and his memories have been transferred or activated within the B4 android body. They're not going to be. It's going to be more obvious that they're retconning this out if somehow Geordi is okay in the show later on. But we know he was there, and this attack obviously took place. And if they just don't address it, it leaves in our mind that Geordi must have died during that attack.
Obviously, he could have escaped. He could have not been there exactly when the attack occurred, or he could have just escaped.
Right.
And this could even lead to something later. He may be presumed dead, and he may show up. I've speculated, and I've given that hope that there's at least one more legacy character that we're going to see in the show that nobody's talked about. And
right.
if it's Geordi, that would be pretty interesting.
Yeah.
We'll just have to see. But there are some definite implications for this short trek in terms of Star Trek Picard. And also, I'm more interested to see how the Countdown comic book resolves now, and see if they're going to address any of it.
Yeah, but no, yeah. Again, this is easily, of all the short treks I've watched, this is hands down the best one. It was very well produced. It was very interesting. I loved seeing, like I said, like a view of the Federation outside of Starfleet. I know eventually we're going to be getting tons of that because they're not in Starfleet and Picard, which bothers me. But this was fun. The other may grow a little old on me eventually. But no, it was very interesting. If you have CBS All Access, if you have not watched Children of Mars, I highly, highly recommend it. It's kind of required viewing in my mind, and leading up to Picard.
Yeah, I definitely agree. So I think we can move on to Morbius. How's that sound?
All right, sounds good.
So this is something that honestly wasn't, we've talked about the character Morbius, but I really didn't even know that a trailer was out like this, or was coming out. I didn't even realize that the film was that far along. So I was actually pretty surprised by this trailer coming out.
Yeah, it's this is a really, if you're into the Spider-Man comics, if you're into the Marvel comics, if you've enjoyed sort of the vampire, like the darker side of the Marvel universe, where we're talking about things like Blade or Tomb of Dracula, Werewolf by Night, this is really interesting because I made the comment to my wife a couple of days ago. I said, it's interesting how dark the Marvel universe is going this year. When you look at Morbius here, which obviously Morbius is a living vampire. When you look at the second Black Widow trailer, which is an espionage spy thriller, and then we're looking at New Mutants, Marvel Universe is going to be going to a very dark and interesting place. And I'm very excited for it, too, because I'm so looking forward to Blade. And it's just kind of fun because I feel like that I talked about the rumors that Moon Knight, which will be on Disney Plus. I've been hearing a lot of rumors that Moon Knight will be tying into and introducing characters from Werewolf by Night. It'll be introducing, zombies, and we'll get maybe the early introduction of, vampires, and maybe little hints of Blade actually worked into Moon Knight, which makes sense because Moon Knight actually debuted in Werewolf by Night. He was actually a mercenary hired to take out the werewolf by night, the lead character, which is named character's name is Jack Russell. But anyhow, that's intended to be obvious right there. But anyhow, no, the Morbius trailer looks really interesting.
Let's break it down. It goes by pretty quick, so let's break it down. In fact, this is like a trailer for the trailer. So they do a little countdown here before the trailer starts. Okay, so like our first image we get is obviously of all these bats,
right?
These vampire bats. Okay, so this is almost like a trailer before the trailer. So here's the official trailer right here. So we start out at this scene. It looks like it's at some sort of a preparatory school, something like that. We have what looks like an Orthodox priest there. And this is Morbius, right? As a kid.
Yeah.
He's got some sort of a blood disease that causes him to not walk well. He has some disabilities as a result of that. And of course, he gets picked on for it. Now we get to see him as an adult. Looks like he's in a hospital. Oh no, that's still him as a kid. So he's growing up with this disability, with these issues. They're kind of explaining that in the trailer, that he's got a blood disease that causes him to be disabled. Now, is that from the comic? Do you remember? In the comic, is that also, was he? Did he grow up with this blood disease, and was he disabled like basically all his life?
I'm not terribly familiar with the Morbius comic. I just know the character more from when he would show up. It's not a character I had a particular fascination with. I love vampires in the Marvel Universe. It's mostly circles around just the Tomb of Dracula comic, which just follows Dracula outright. But Morbius, of course, is a character that debuted in Spider-Man and was sort of like a Spider-Man villain and then eventually like a Spider-Man kind of anti-hero, kind of like the Punisher, very much like the Punisher. They start off as villains and basically they are turned into anti-heroes. And that's kind of the role that Morbius occupies. And of course, Morbius was a part of the Midnight Suns trio of comics that they debuted in the 90s. And he has a lot of fans. It's a very unusual choice to develop a film for. He's a fan favorite, but it's a very small niche, kind of pocket of the Marvel universe, that he kind of inhabits.
Well, I should mention, because we've talked about this several times, and as I mentioned, this trailer totally took me by surprise, because I wasn't even ready for a Morbius film at all. Because you and I have talked about Morbius numerous times, because you've been talking about Blade a lot, and anytime you bring up Blade, I bring up Morbius. And the thing is about Morbius is, like you said, Morbius debuted in the Spider-Man comics, so he's actually part of the Spider-Verse. He's part of Sony's Spider-Verse. Whether he's going to be part of the MCU or not, we don't know. Obviously, we'll talk about the last scene in this trailer and the implications of it. So anyway, we can see Morbius. He's disabled. He's an adult now. He's giving some sort of talk. I think he's become a research scientist or a doctor at this point. Obviously, he's very much inspired by the fact of his own illness. He's trying to deal with it, trying to find a cure. We got a scene here of the city. Him walking. I think this is where he's kind of talking about, he's trying to treat this thing. He's obviously involved with treating this disease. He's talking to other children apparently with the same disease, trying to treat them. Probably with very limited success. I think in this scene he's talking about how his situation is getting worse.
And that does come from the comics. I was just kind of looking it up because he debuted in Amazing Spider-Man 101. The character is created by Roy Thomas and Gil Kane. And it does say that, yes, he did have a rare and fatal blood disease. So this is all coming directly from the comics.
Very cool. And that was my understanding as well. It's kind of like the Hulk story in a way of he's trying to he's experimenting, right? And he's trying to he has good intentions with this experimentation, but it kind of goes horribly wrong. Right. As happens in comic books quite often. So this is the scene where apparently he has decided. We don't know exactly what's happened, but apparently he's made some connection with like vampire bats and his serum. And he feels that exposing himself to the bats apparently is going to give the catalyst to his cure. So he's coming up to this cave, we assume probably in South America or something like that. And he cuts himself. He's about to cut himself to expose the blood. And now the vampire bats are going to come to him. So apparently this is some sort of a catalyst. It does remind you also a lot of Spider-Man himself, right? Because Spider-Man is obviously bitten by a spider, has spider powers. Morbius is bitten by a vampire bat, so he becomes a vampire, right?
Right.
Which is also an interesting idea. I've actually always been kind of fascinated by the whole Morbius vampire, because to me, Morbius is the kind of like pseudoscience vampire. You know what I mean? He's not like a supernatural vampire. He's actually a man-made vampire.
Right, and it actually ties into as well a lot of concepts and ideas that are actually explored in the Wesley Snipes Blade film, specifically the first one, because there's a research. I think she's a doctor, and she's actually researching blood and its effects and looking for different ways to cure blood-based illnesses. And so we kind of see that it kind of starts off with that right before one of the vampires that was killed by Blade wakes up and basically attacks them, and then Blade shows up. So it's very interesting how all this is. Well, I know the Sonyverse isn't directly connected. In a weird way, to me, it still is all kind of connected. They all you could see that through line, that connects them all together. And that's part of the reason I'm so excited for Morbius, because and a lot of these dark return of heroes, knowing that we're getting characters like Moon Knight and Blade, because I love this part of the Marvel universe.
We got a comment from Orville Nation, our friend at Orville Nation. Hey guys, PJs, good to see you out here. Thank you so much for commenting and checking out the show. Orville Nation's a big friend to the channel. They do a lot of retweets, a lot of comments for us on Twitter. So it's great to see you, Orville Nation. Actually, one of these days we're hoping to actually do some more stuff with you, and we'd love to have you on the show sometime to talk specifically about Orville. So I just want to give him a shout out there, because he says you guys rock, and Orville Nation, you guys rock too. So you guys have been great to us.
Thanks for the shout out, and we'll actually be talking about the Orville here in just a little bit, actually.
Yeah, we've got McFarlane news later on that Orville Nation you might want to stick around for. Although this Morbius stuff is pretty fascinating to me as well. So we've got Morbius here. He's obviously changing now. He's getting the superpowers. He's become stronger. Obviously, he's no longer handicapped. Now, this is the interesting thing too here. If you notice in this little trailer, we are talking about the Sonyverse, if you will. But obviously, the Sonyverse is connected to the MCU. Studio that brought you Spider-Man: Homecoming, studio that brought you Far From Home, and also Venom, which I haven't seen Venom, but a lot of people are wondering how Venom's going to connect to this, and if it will, and how so.
I'm really excited to see how this connects to Venom as well, because I really enjoyed Venom, and I'm very excited.
I still need to see Venom. I still haven't seen Venom, so I can't comment on Venom too much. But obviously, Morbius is in the aftermath. Obviously, now he's ripped and he's all ready to go. Very strong. You can see this is where he's talking about the echolocation. He now has the echolocation ability of the bats, which kind of complements Spider-Man's Spidey sense in a way, right?
Yep.
You can see the ties of Spider-Man. I mean, Morbius is a Spider-Man character, so I think it's important to show those ties, So this is the part where they start talking about that, yes, he does have a craving for blood. We don't know if these are mercenaries or if this is like just a special operations team sent to get him, but it looks like he's having them for lunch. Now he's kind of out, and it looks like he's a fugitive. If in the previous scene, we could see that he looks like he has some prison scrubs on. It looks like he's probably making an escape. So he's got.
And then did you notice a couple things I wanted to point out real quick? The first one is people are like making a big deal out of this image of Spider-Man here on the wall with the word murderer, scrawled across it, because Mysterio, spoiler alert if you haven't seen Spider-Man Far From Home, but in Spider-Man Far From Home, Mysterio kind of makes Spider-Man out to look like a murderer, and kind of frame him in a sense. That's part of his scheme. So it's interesting to see this image.
I literally just noticed this. You know that?
Oh, okay. Yes.
I literally just noticed this right now. And that's one of the reasons I love doing the trailer breakdowns, and the fact that we don't really script this. So we kind of just go, yeah, I just saw this. I'm like, okay, so we know. So now the last scene's even more significant and makes sense, yeah. And we know where we're at. So anyway, yes. So it looks like obviously this does tie in to the Spider-Verse. Peter Parker has been framed, from the previous film, and it looks like, that's a nice little Easter egg there. I doubt Spider-Man will be in the movie overtly, but we know another character will be, especially with this. So this looks like there's some sort of law enforcement team probably going after Morbius.
Did you notice this guy's got did you see his arm? I don't know if that's supposed to be someone in particular, but this one, look at his arm. He's got some kind of mechanized something or other going on there with his arm, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, and I didn't notice that before either. And I'm trying to think in my data banks who that possibly could be. I mean, he looks like he's a special agent or a detective. He's got body armor on, and he's wearing a tie. So that says special agent or detective to me. And then he's got this, what looks like some sort of augmentation. That's pretty cool. I'm trying to think in the Marvel universe. I don't know who that could be, but that's pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's kind of initial. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I'm not sure, and I'm sure there's stuff on the internet where people have already broken this down and figured out who this character is supposed to be. But the only character that initially comes to mind would be Deathlock, because Deathlock was introduced in the S.H.I.E.L.D. Show. But I can't imagine they'd have access to him in the Spider-Verse. But that was what I thought of when I saw this. It made me think of Deathlock.
Interesting. Yeah, he's definitely got some augmentation there. We got a few more scenes. Goes by pretty quick. I really don't know the significance of many of these characters at all, and obviously this is a pretty quick teaser. A lot of random scenes, and there we go. There's an image of Morbius at last. This is the true Morbius, because anybody who's read the comics, or actually, like a lot of my superhero stuff, my first exposure to Morbius was from the 90s Spider-Man cartoon. And I used to really enjoy that cartoon because they had Punisher, they had Morbius, I believe they had Blade. You know what I mean? They had all sorts of cool storyline in that cartoon, that animated series, and that's how I learned about Morbius, was because of that show. And the thing about Morbius is kind of like the Thing. He's kind of distorted looking, Yeah. He's monster looking. So I think that's kind of interesting. Unlike Blade, who looks like a regular person,
And a lot of people have already pointed this out. This image looks like something ripped directly from the comics. So
yeah,
it's an amazing shot.
That's pretty good. And
I love that kind of 80s inspired logo.
There we go. This is the last scene I wanted to talk about. It looks like Vulture is here. He is back. It looks like he may be posing as like an orderly or something like that. That's kind of the way that I took this. It looks like this is like a police vehicle or something that he's in front of, or an ambulance.
My thinking is, judging by what he says, I think it's a prison transport. And he's either broken him out because he needs his help for something, or he's broken him out because Morbius is going around basically feeding off of bad guys. And maybe he, takes out this prison transport, and he's basically going to go through these guys in order to satisfy his need for blood. So I'm curious if this is the end of Vulture in the Spider-Man movies, or if they're getting ready to team up. So,
well, I would say based on the line, they're getting ready to team up, because he says, you're not, you don't want to be a good guy anymore, or something along those lines is what Michael Keaton says, the Vulture says to him. So seems to me a pretty obvious tie-in, especially with the poster that I only noticed just now when we were doing the review, that definitely this does fall in the Spider-Verse, which does also connect to the MCU. So it'll be very interesting. Be very interesting. There has been some speculation because of the Spider-Verse and the animated film, and also they have touched on the Spider-Verse in the last Spider-Man film. They touched on it in Endgame and the idea of the multiverse. That this could be sort of like an alternate dimension from the MCU, that kind of idea.
Right.
That has like some subtle differences, or that possibly Venom is part of this alternate universe. I mean, to me, this is pretty overt that this is going to fall within at least the MCU Spider-Man continuity, because we have the murder image of Spider-Man, which falls into the last movie, and we have the Vulture. And the Vulture is clearly going to be involved in some respect. I think you kind of touched on maybe he's the one who gets Morbius out because he wants Morbius to help him to kill Spider-Man. Something along. We lost the feed for a second there, but we'll just have to see where this is going. But obviously, it does tie in at least into the bigger Spider-Verse, the Spider-Verse movies, if you will.
Right. Well, and I'd heard a lot that this is set within essentially the same universe, definitely as Venom. And these are both Sony specific movies, and Sony is trying to build their own kind of interconnected, movie universe, kind of like what Marvel has done. And with Venom being a well-received film, and I quite liked Venom. I really enjoyed Venom. So I'm definitely excited to see what they're going to do here with Morbius. And it's fun that if Sony continues to do this, it's fun because I've heard, I think at one point there was a Kraven the Hunter film in development. And it'd be interesting to see if Sony can actually build sort of like a Spider-Man, interconnected universe, movies, like a little, pocket universe populated totally by villains operating as anti-heroes from time to time. Be very curious to see.
I mean, this was talked about extensively when Sony and Disney had split before they renegotiated things. Sony had been on this path to do their Spider-Verse. I mean, obviously that you can see that in the animated film. They're kind of on that path. That's what they were kind of figuring if they couldn't continue these deals with Disney. So I think what's going to happen is you're going to see both happen at the same time. They will collaborate with Marvel Studios and Disney when they can, and when they feel that's advantageous to them. At the same time, they're going to build up the Spider-Verse, and they're going to do it in the Marvel Studio fashion, which is that they're taking one character at a time, introducing him in his own movie, the way you're supposed to do it, DC. And they're taking one character at a time, focusing on them, and then eventually we can bring them all together for some big, Marvel Avengers type film. That's what I see. I think it's a good strategy. It's a strategy that worked very well for Marvel Studios, and I think Sony is being very smart because they're not putting all their eggs in one basket. They made Venom was a viable film. I think Morbius is getting some very good buzz. So I think that they're taking their time. Again, note this, DC. They're taking their time, and instead of slamming everybody together, they're going to give them each their own franchise, if you will, and then they'll bring them together in something big. Some sort of like a Sinister Six movie. A lot of people speculate that's where we're going. So it's not going to be about it's not going to be about the good guys. It's going to be about the bad guys all wanting to take down Spider-Man.
Right.
Something along those lines, which would be cool. It would be cool to see some version of the Sinister Six. You know what I mean? That wouldn't that be neat? Like, instead of building up to a superhero team, we're actually building up to a supervillain team to destroy Spider-Man or something like that. You know what I mean? That would be a cool master plan, in my opinion, because that's the big weakness of Marvel Studios is the villains. The villains are the big weakness of Marvel Studios. They just have not done a good job with the villains, other than Loki and Thanos. Otherwise, they've all been throwaways. One film and they're dead. So we'll see. I think that would be intriguing if we get some version. If this is all going to lead up to the Sinister Six, some version of the Sinister Six, and they're going to take on Spider-Man. We're just leading up to taking out Spider-Man. That we're going to have a big battle. So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Right. And let's see here. I have something I do want to mention just briefly. Talking about the DC universe doing it right or doing it wrong, as you were just mentioning. I want to, if you'll share my screen here real quick. So
That's a
this
cool
is not,
image.
yeah, this is not a huge spoiler, but in a sense, it is a little bit of a spoiler. So Crisis on Infinite Earths, they had the last 2 episodes are now available on the CW app if you didn't get a chance to actually watch them when they were broadcast live. Definitely check it out, especially if you watch the first 3 parts. You're going to want to watch the conclusion. This is a brief shot of probably one of my favorite scenes from it. You were talking about how the best way to do it is kind of introduce a character at a time and build up to something and then bring all the characters together. Well, that's exactly what CW did with the Crisis on Infinite Earths event. They have spent, Arrow's been running for 7 seasons, and they've been slowly rolling out and doing these crossover events building up to Crisis on Infinite Earths. And it's very impressive the way that they pulled this whole thing together. My only complaint about this series is that I felt like we spent way too much time saying goodbye to Oliver Queen or Green Arrow, because the Arrow show is basically folding up its tent and going away. But I did quite like Arrow, but Arrow's run for 7 seasons. Everyone associated with Arrow apparently is ready to move on. So Arrow kind of sees his way kind of into the sunset. But the Crisis event was a lot of fun if you're a DC Comics fan. And I highly, highly recommend it. Again, all 5 episodes, you can watch this on CW. I'm not going to give away the big, huge last surprise cameo. I was kind of shocked to see who it was. And while it was all but too brief, it was pretty surprising, the last big cameo reveal. So definitely,
Was this a good surprise or a bad surprise?
it was a good surprise. It's not a bad surprise at all. The show has basically been leading to Justice League, and actually this kind of ends with the CW's version of the Justice League. They're actually sitting around. Spoiler alert. They're actually sitting around basically like the kind of the Justice League table. They've got their logos on the chairs. It was really cool. It was a little, unfortunately, it was TV, so it felt a little cheaper than it needed to be. But beyond that, it's really cool. So if you're a DC Comics fan, I can't recommend watching Crisis on Infinite Earths enough. I'm looking forward to, apparently the Superman and Lois show is actually going to series, and that'll be coming out soon. I'm very excited to watch that show. But I mean, seriously, I mean, live action, I mean, Martian Manhunter, Flash, Batwoman, Green Arrow, Brandon Routh reprising his role as Superman. I mean, it was so much fun. And John Cryer's Lex Luthor, I didn't like him in the first 3 parts, but in the second 2, he kind of redeemed himself, and I kind of was finally seeing him as Lex Luthor there towards the end. I thought he did a pretty good job in the last 2 episodes. But no, I mean, if you're a DC Comics fan, I can't recommend it enough. You need to check out Crisis on Infinite Earths. It has the same problems a lot of the CW shows have, but if you can kind of look past some of that, if they had taken their time and built up the DC Comics universe, it kind of gives you a taste of what really could have been done. Now, in this same thing, as it ends, we get a lot of quick cut shots of different things. And if you're excited for Stargirl, you want to watch this. I literally could not. The last ending bits of this, I could not believe what I was seeing. And the fact that it all kind of exists and the fact that it all is interconnected as a part of the multiverse is pretty amazing. So while DC has been maybe having some missteps when it comes to films, although I'd say Joker would maybe say not as many missteps as you might think, when you look at what they've been doing on television, when you look at what they've been doing with some of their streaming content, it's pretty impressive. Pretty impressive. So kudos to Warner Brothers, the CW network, and DC Comics for pulling off a pretty impressive event in Crisis on Infinite Earths.
I just want to say I still haven't watched it. You make me very interested in it. I just haven't supported the CW very much, in large part because I don't get the CW anymore on my television. I use an antenna, an actual real antenna,
right.
And my local CW affiliate doesn't come through anymore for some reason. I know there's an app available. I think that's the main way you watch, right? You watch on the CW app.
Yes.
So yeah, I definitely would like to check this out. I've heard about so many of the cameos from you and through other sources, and I'm this is the big one, the one that we have on screen. Brandon Roth. He's one of the big ones. There's other ones that I'm really looking forward to seeing. I think as you mentioned before, you said the last surprise cameo. They're probably all too brief. I would love to have a show or a new movie with the Brandon Roth Superman coming back.
No, yeah, and I'm hoping that they might do something with it because, it's weird. This, and then I also think of Anson Mounts Pike. These are things that people are excited about, that they really loved and enjoyed. And these are directions that, both CBS as well as Warner Brothers could move towards. This shot here is, of course, the classic Superman outfit, but it has still the Alex Ross Kingdom Come inspiration. But this is the classic fly by the camera, look and smile and wink with the classic Chris Reeve Superman music underneath it. It was pretty friggin' cool. And one of the other things they teased, I'll just throw this out there because I know you still haven't downloaded the app and watched it yet. They teased Green Lantern. So, and the Stargirl teaser alone at the end of this, I literally could not believe what I was seeing. So I'm really excited for Stargirl. What they've been doing on CW, all the episodes are not winners, and all the shows are not they have their issues. But what they've been able to do, if you're a DC Comics fan, is really, really impressive. And like I said before, Black Lightning is a great show. Black Lightning is totally worth watching. I can't recommend it enough. Definitely check out the Crisis on Infinite Earths event.
Very cool. Very cool. Actually, I have something related to what you were saying about Star Trek Discovery and the Christopher Pike. You okay to talk about that?
Yeah, we can talk about Captain Pike.
So I found this article. This is from /film.com. It says a Star Trek Discovery spinoff starring Captains Pike and Spock may happen at CBS All Access.
Wow, about time.
Let's get into the meat of this. I got to get my graphics. Fix my graphics here. We're not talking about spoilers here, and we're not talking about Crisis of Infinite Earths anymore. So, all right. So I thought you would appreciate this article because I know you are a big Pike fan, a Pike Discovery fan, and so let's talk about this a little bit. So it says CBS All Access presented the second half of their television Critic Association's Day, where head of original content Julie McNamara, McNamara, that sounds right, took some questions in an executive session and revealed possibilities for new Star Trek spinoffs. So Star Trek Discovery takes place 10 years prior to the original series, blah, 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 blah. But it says two classic characters, Pike and Spock, appeared. Season 3 of Discovery will take place in the far future. We've actually commented on that a little bit. We talked about the trailer, teaser for that. It says we've definitely heard fans that people are excited about the notion. Oh wait, I missed something here. Here we go. Star Trek 3 will take place in the far future of the Federation universe. That means leaving Spock and Pike behind. Asked if they would consider a spinoff featuring Discovery's incarnation of those classic Trek characters, McNamara said yes. She said, we've definitely heard fans that people are excited about the notion of that. We have heard them loud and clear. We also saw that there was incredible chemistry around the bridge crew. So among many things that we talk about, the idea is certainly one of them. So that's the head of their television development. And she apparently said at this event that, yes, they have heard you. and I think you are one of them because I know that you've been a big advocate of this. They said that yes, it is on their radar. Obviously, that's not like a green light that they're going to do it or anything like that. But she said yes, it is on the table. She's not saying no.
All right, well, that's good. And then hopefully here coming up soon in an episode, we're actually hopefully going to be talking about those Star Trek Early Voyages comics that I was telling you about that actually feature Pike and a young Spock. And I think even those are not quote unquote canon, I think that there's a lot of fun, interesting things that when we read those to get a sense of the kind of the fun possibilities a Pike show might entail.
Definitely.
So, segueing from fun possibilities and what that might entail, do you mind sharing my screen and we'll talk about the new Black Widow trailer?
Yes, and I have not seen this, so this is going to be my first honest reaction. I didn't even know about this. So,
all right, so we're going to let it roll. So as a lot of people know, we're getting a Black Widow movie. I think it looks really stellar. It just looks really good. It looks like it's a bit like a fun kind of a spy story, kind of like I'm kind of hoping it's going to be akin to what we saw with Winter Soldier. That same kind of like tension and action. And this trailer, man, last two trailers have looked so good. But in this, we get a sense that the Black Widow program is operating again. And looks like Black Widow and some of the former Black Widows, as well as the Red Guardian, are going to be basically coming out of retirement and coming together again in order to try and deal with some things from Natasha's past, as well as dealing with aspects of the Black Widow program that's still training and putting together these assassins. And we get a lot of good shots here of Taskmaster, who's one of our main villains. Those were some of the widows there from the training program. And then here's Taskmaster. And we see him using all his classic stuff from the comics, the shield and the sword and the whole bit. And we actually see in the trailer, too, they show us that he is able to mimic movements. He sees someone do something, and then he does it right back at them. And that's Taskmaster's unique ability. So I am quite excited about Black Widow. This movie looks like it's going to be really good. I've always enjoyed Scarlett Johansson as Black Widow going back to Iron Man 2. She was a pleasant surprise in that role. And in all the subsequent films, including the Avengers films, I thought, and especially Captain America Winter Soldier, I've just completely fallen in love with this character, much more than I had in the comics. I mean, Black Widow has been a fixture in the comics for a very long time, and I was always kind of cold to her. You know, it's like, oh, okay, it's Black Widow, whatever, you know. But they did a really good job of kind of introducing and selling us on this character. So much so, again, spoilers, that I was quite shocked at her eventual fate in Avengers Endgame. But I'm very excited for this movie. When they first announced it, I was kind of dismayed by the fact that this film's going to be, you know, not taking place and we're not getting Black Widow back, because I think Black Widow's death and Endgame is definitely set. I don't think they're going to walk that back. And I was like, wow, but
it depends on how well this movie does.
yeah. Well, we'll see.
It depends on how well this movie does. That's I'm telling you right now, Dave. That's the bottom line.
Well, I'm really looking forward to this movie. It looks like it's going to be a lot of fun. Especially, in all honesty, I think if you liked Winter Soldier, you like that action, that kind of espionage, that kind of, you know, James Bondish kind of story, I think that's what we're going to be getting with Black Widow. And I'm pretty excited for it. So I think this is going to be a good one. So everyone keep your eyes out for Black Widow for when it comes out in May. I think it's going to be a good one.
Yeah, so tell me, good. I didn't see a whole lot of new revelations though from this trailer. With the audio, I assume that you listened to. Was there any revelations you got or anything that looked new? It looked to me like, you know, it had the same basic elements as the previous trailer. Did you notice anything new?
Well, the big thing from this trailer that's new is that they're obviously going to be coming at the new operatives, the new trainees, the new Black Widows, they're going to be coming in conflict with them. And then the big thing from this one is they kind of reveal, if you can read between the lines, that the villain in this movie has the ability to mimic other people's moves. That's his superpower. And for someone like Black Widow, mimicking her moves would make you a pretty formidable, villain for her, because that's her fighting ability and her skills with weapons. That's what makes the Black Widow so formidable. So if you can suddenly take that off of the playing field, it kind of changes the threat level. And then we saw in this trailer as well as the other one, we're getting a little bit more in here on their Red Guardian, which was basically intended to be Russia's version of Captain America. The shots that we've seen, you can tell that Taskmaster is able to mimic his moves as well, which means even though he's superhuman, if he's able to also mimic his superhuman abilities, that's pretty impressive. So, but those are the big reveals, is that they're obviously going to be coming in conflict with other operatives from the Black Widow program, and then they're just kind of showcasing their new villain in the Taskmaster.
Very cool. Very cool. Yeah, I am looking forward to this film. We did do a review of the other teaser, the previous teaser. And yeah, I am looking forward to it. I do think it's interesting. One good thing about introducing a lot of new characters is obviously we know Black Widow is going to get out of this okay. But with a lot of new characters, at least that way we have some more tension. These new characters we never see in any of the later Marvel movies. So theoretically, any one of them or all of them could die, which hopefully they'll use that in the film to create some more tension, because that is a problem with prequels, as we know that Black Widow is going to make it out. So,
well, and I've heard a lot of rumors that this film is actually going to set up too. Her sister, the blonde-haired lady in the trailer here, who's actually also a trained Black Widow operative. I've been hearing a lot of rumors that this film is going to help set her up to become the new Black Widow for the movies moving forward, and that she'll be kind of
for the new Avengers stuff. I got that.
Yeah, and she will be kind of taking Natasha's place as the Black Widow. And then
that makes a ton of sense for whatever it is, phase 5 or 6 or whatever we're in now. So that I could totally see that, because I know that's where they're headed. Obviously, with Falcon becoming the new Captain America, there's going to be a new Avengers movie at some point. That's the model. That's what they're going to do. I could totally see that we're going to get the new Black Widow. So yeah. I'm not sure how I feel about that. I'll have to see it. I'll have to watch the movie. I don't know how I feel about that. So I like Scarlett Johansson. She's fine. So, but yes, they did kill her. But as we know, I mean, in comics, nobody stays dead. Science fiction, nobody stays dead. Right. So who knows what they'll do. Plus, remember, you also have this whole multiverse thing. So they can always just bring in an alternate version of that character. They gave themselves an out. They can bring back Iron Man. They can bring back anybody. They can bring back Thanos. It's just an alternate version, from an alternate universe. So they kind of put that door wide open. In fact, the Loki show is going to be based on the alternate Loki. The prime Loki, if you will, is dead. Right. That's been confirmed in stuff that I've read. So the Loki we're going to get is the Loki that stole the Tesseract in Endgame. So we'll see. We'll see what they do and all that kind of stuff. I am looking forward to this film though as well.
Very cool. All right, so I think our last thing we're going to cover here in the news segment is we're going to talk about this news, actually about Seth MacFarlane.
I have one more thing.
Go ahead. Sorry.
I do have one more thing. It's another Star Trek news, and so I definitely want to get your take on this, and then we can go into the story you're going to talk about. This is a Hollywood Reporter article. You may have heard about this. This was dated January 9th, so it was like late last week. And it says Noah Hawley suggests his Star Trek movie will include a new cast. Did you hear about this?
No, I did not hear that.
So Noah Hawley is the person that has been selected to direct the next quote-unquote Star Trek 4. Now, let me get my graphic. My graphic is wrong here. Let's get rid of that. There we go. So Noah Hawley is the person that's been tapped to direct quote-unquote Star Trek 4. And it says here, asked if Chris Pine and his Enterprise crew will be returning, the writer-director told The Hollywood Reporter, I don't know. But new characters often involve a new cast.
Hmm.
So this is the most direct evidence that we've gotten that Star Trek 4 is not going to be Star Trek 4. So it said in November, news broke that Fargo and Legion creator Noah Hawley would write and direct Star Trek 4. The movie said to continue the voyages of Chris Pine's Captain Kirk and his crew. But a few weeks later, star Simon Pegg turned heads when he suggested the news had been incorrect and that his Enterprise crew would not be returning for Hawley's movie. Now Hawley himself is suggesting that is indeed the case. It says, to call it Star Trek 4 is kind of a misnomer. I have my own take on the franchise as a lifelong fan. Hawley told the Hollywood Reporter podcast TV Top 5 in an interview set to bow in April. It says, asked if the film would involve a new cast, he responded, yeah, I think so, yeah. Pressed if anyone from the cast last seen in 2016 Star Trek Beyond would return, Hawley added, it's early days, I don't know, but new characters often involve new cast. Hawley also expounded on his vision somewhat, referencing 1982 Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, widely considered to be the high point of Trek. It's William Shatner putting on his reading glasses and lowering Khan's shields, which cost like $9.50. There's no big action sequence. He's just more clever, Hawley said, recalling a key scene. There's something really uplifting about that feeling. I went to Paramount and just had my own ideas for what I wanted to do with it. So that's the direction I'm going in. It's still very early days, so I can't really be more specific, but it's going to be different. While CBS All Access has been building out its Star Trek universe with shows including Discovery and the upcoming Star Trek Picard, Paramount has had trouble finding a big screen follow-up after Beyond underperformed at the box office. Succession helmer S.J. Clarkson was set to make history as the franchise's first female director on the big screen, but that project fell apart in 2018 over salary disputes with Pine and Chris Hemsworth. Quentin Tarantino has been developing his own take on Star Trek since 2017, but recently suggested he was moving on. Hawley will produce his Trek via his 26 Keys shingle, along with Bad Robot, the production banner run by J.J. Abrams, who helmed the first two installments of this current Trek incarnation. On the TV front for Hawley, Fargo season 4 bows in April on Netflix. So anyway, that kind of sums up all the different Star Trek movie stories that have been out there. Quentin Tarantino's project appears to be dead. The Kelvin cast appears to be dead. It looks like this will be a new take on Star Trek, whether it will be in the Kelvin verse or the CBS verse or introduce a new Star Trek verse. We don't know. That we don't know.
No, it'll be interesting to see how they move forward. I mean, to be honest, I keep thinking the way to go is to do I mean, this is just me, but to do an Enterprise film with the Pike era crew and actually have it be kind of like a TV movie that would actually debut on CBS All Access. I've talked about it before. I think that the strength and the versatility and the uniqueness of all these different streaming services is that you don't have to do like a long-term committed series. You could do the miniseries events like we used to have on TV back in the day. You can just have just the TV movie. And there's a lot of content, a lot of fun things that could be explored in this venue. To slightly connect back to Trek, my wife and I actually watched Unbelievable on Netflix. I'm a fan of Caitlin Dever, the young actress. She actually the first thing I saw her was the TV show Justified, and she played a very interesting kind of troubled young teenage girl on Justified. And I had seen that she had been nominated for a Golden Globe for this thing called Unbelievable. So my wife and I looked into it, and Michael Chabon actually was one of the executive producers on Unbelievable. And it's a really good show, and it's actually touted as a limited series. It's not touted as an ongoing thing. It's just a limited series, kind of like, the mini-series events that we used to get on TV back in the day. So there's a lot of possibility with what could be done with Trek. I'm not convinced that just doing another, movie is necessarily the right way to go, especially with Trek sort of in its sort of state that it's sitting right now, where some people are liking it and some people are just outright hating it.
Well, I actually like the idea of quite frankly a new Trek, because I have issues with what they're doing on CBS All Access, and I had major issues with the Kelvin. So I'm actually more encouraged by Noah Hawley's suggestion that he's just going to do something completely different. I would like to see him do a new cast. I would like to see him maybe put in some legacy characters from Deep Space Nine, because they haven't gotten a lot of love lately, as far as with the shows or movies or anything. So that's kind of an untapped area, in my opinion. And I think it would be cool if he did something different. Just give us a few legacy characters, like I said, let's say from Deep Space Nine, as an example, just because they have gotten the least amount of attention so far, and have a few people to introduce us to this new crew and take us someplace different and do something completely different with the films. An easy way to deal with this is have them on a deep space mission. Kind of like it could be like Voyager, except intentional, and they're just out in the middle of nowhere, and they're kind of on their own. Because doesn't Starfleet do that? Don't they send deep space missions? I mean, surely they do. There was an episode of Next Gen where we found out the Klingons do it. The Klingons do it. Why wouldn't the Federation do it? So I think just do something like that, and then you don't have to sync up the movies with the TV shows. You can get back into exploration. I mean, there's all sorts of things you could do. Now, clearly, that's something that encourages me, is that he's referencing Wrath of Khan directly. Now, the only thing that I worry about is he going to do his own new version of the classic crew? Like, is he going to recast Kirk again? That I'm going to be like, no, I'm not into that. We've already done that. We've already gone there. Had their chance. I don't want to see another Kirk. I certainly want to see another Spock, because we've got too many Spocks at this point, in my opinion. So I'm like, just let's do a new crew. Let's do a new crew. Let's send them out in deep space. Let's send them to the Gamma Quadrant. You know what I mean? And see what the Dominion's been up to. And that would be a great segue to put in some Deep Space Nine characters. So that's just an idea that I have. I'm sure Noah's not going to care. Obviously, he has his own idea. That's what he's saying. He has his own idea, and it doesn't necessarily involve the Kelvin crew. So we'll see. What ultimately he does. If he does just recast, Kirk and the classic crew again, I'm going to have some issues with that. That I think is the wrong path to go. But I do like to see Star Trek on the big screen. I think Star Trek actually has some of its best moments on the big screen. Wrath of Khan being the apex of Trek for me. So when I do hear people give the argument that Trek is meant to be television. Well, it started in television, but it moved on. It's more than television now. It's a multimedia franchise. There are books, there are comics. We're going to be talking about a comic later. There's all sorts of different platforms for Trek. So I don't think one excludes the other. I think what you're saying, I think that's what CBS All Access is going to do. Obviously, I think part of the idea of the short treks is to kind of put out feelers and put out promotions for other shows. I think that was part of what they did with the because they did that. They actually had Chris Pike, featured in several of the short treks.
Yeah, so the majority of the short treks were kind of Enterprise Pike crew material.
So I think those are definitely feelers they put out, and that's a great use of the short treks. By the way, I think that a great use of the short treks is what they did with Children of Mars in terms of a lead up to a big show that's coming out, or to put out essentially like mini pilots for other shows. That's a great way to use short treks, because I think a lot of people have been very disappointed in short treks. But I think that's a great way to use it is put out some ideas. When they hear something from even a fan that says, hey, why don't you do this? Be like, hey, we could do a short trek on that and see what the reaction is, because there's a lot less investment when they do that. And I think that was the intention anyway. So then you could see a mini series about any number of things. I would love to see a mini series of a Deep Space Nine reunion or something like that, or a movie. Like I said, I would love to see some Deep Space Nine love for the new movie coming out. But we don't know what era it's going to be. We don't know which timeline. I mean,
right.
It is getting kind of crazy when you think about it with all the different timelines, because Kelvin did open a big can of worms. A lot of hardcore fans were upset about Kelvin because what it did was it took the sort of multiverse endgame Marvel view of time travel, which is not consistent with what Star Trek always said time travel was. Although it makes more sense to me, because I think time travel is kind of nonsense. I'm more into the multiverse interpretation of time travel than the classic Trek time travel. But some of the best Trek is time travel, like the City on Edge of Forever, right? So it's a little bit of a mess. It's messed up the continuity a bit, but it's where we're at. So whatever they do, I just hope that it is something that gets back to sort of the core of Star Trek, and it has maybe some more to do about exploration, has that positive vibe, has some of those great moments like he's talking about, like that. He has a good point with that scene in Star Trek 2 is it's a scene where basically almost like nothing is happening at first until they actually start shooting. It's that battle of wits. It's that good writing, that good deep writing that, quite frankly, I think a lot of modern Trek lacks right now, because they're looking for they need more flair. They need more flares. You know what I mean? That's right. We need more flares. We need, okay. Enough with the flares. We get it. That's the JJ style. He likes that, the lens flare. We don't need it. Don't need it in Star Trek, in my opinion. So we'll see. We'll see what Noah does. Like I said, I am actually cautiously optimistic that he's going to go in another direction and do something cool, which I think is ultimately what the movies have to do, unless they try to do something like a Voyager reunion, or they try to do something like a Deep Space Nine reunion, which I would love. But I don't know how much of a market there really is for that. So we'll have to see.
Yeah, and I mean, personally, if they were going to pull from something else, doing something with some of the classic DS9 characters would be great. And I'd also, in all honesty, I would really love to. I've always loved Peter David's New Frontier novels, and I always felt like that there was a lot of really great material within those novels that could be adapted into a film. So we'll see what they do. We'll see what they do with Star Trek moving forward as far as the movies go. But I was kind of surprised. It makes me wonder if that Tarantino film was ever really like a thing, or if they were just leveraging Once Upon a Time in Hollywood to bolster Trek, and they were kind of cross-promoting with these headlines between the two of them. It's like Trek gets a headline out of Tarantino gets a headline out of Trek. It makes me wonder if there was ever really a Tarantino film even really being discussed, or if that was all just a marketing ploy for the two studios to kind of benefit off of each other.
Very possible. Very, very possible. That's absolutely the way that Hollywood works. It's all about buzz. So you just never know. They obviously were trying to do something to recover from the initial debacle and the film not happening. And so I think they were trying to do their best to save some kind of face. So that could be very well could be exactly what happened.
Yeah.
We'll probably never know. We'll probably never know.
So talking about maybe never really knowing, do you want to segue to the Seth MacFarlane news?
Yeah, let me grab that.
So we do have some MacFarlane news. Again, this is Seth MacFarlane, not Todd McFarlane news. Although I do want to mention that I heard from my brother, and he actually manages a collectibles store, and was telling me that these MacFarlane figures that are coming out, the new DC Universe stuff, looks really, really great. Specifically, the animated versions of the characters, like the Batman and the Superman, and they look amazing. All right, so I was kind of shocked to read this headline. But yeah, Seth MacFarlane is leaving 20th Century Fox for an NBC Universal with a new overall deal. My understanding from some of the headlines that I read is that it does involve the Peacock, which will be eventually coming out through Universal at some point. It's interesting because the majority of obviously Seth MacFarlane's output has been over at Fox, which is now owned by Disney. And of course, they made big news with the Orville moving from actually being like a network show to specifically just being on Hulu. I read a lot of these stories with Seth MacFarlane leaving Fox, and to me, between the lines, I feel like that unfortunately for those of us that love Orville, I think its days might be numbered. I know that Orville is still being produced over at Fox, like through Hulu. But I'm just concerned that this might be spelling the end of the Orville, because I just can't see. I can't see Disney wanting to continue to invest into a creator that essentially is now so obviously aligned with Universal. Talking about the streaming wars, our streaming wars segment will be coming up. I can't see Disney being okay with that. So I fear that maybe this next season on Hulu for the Orville might be its last. Just because maybe I'm too much of a pessimist. I can't read this Seth MacFarlane signing with NBC Universal as being good for the Orville. They call me a pessimist or a doomsayer, but I fear for what this means. Now, Eric, you were reading a lot of these news stories as well. You didn't see it quite as doom as gloom as I did. What was your take on? I mean, obviously Seth MacFarlane's going to make a ton of money, but obviously besides that, what was your takeaway from this Universal deal that he signed?
Well, the hopeful part of me is hoping that maybe Orville will actually wind up on Peacock. That's the most hopeful part of me is that's kind of my desire. I don't think there's anything in this article or anything in any of the other articles that I've read that says that could even possibly happen. But I would like to see the Orville on the Peacock simply because you don't have to pay for the Peacock. And I'm hoping that the Peacock is going to have some great content that we can talk about. And guess what? I don't have to pay for it. I don't have to do a free trial and then decide whether I'm going to continue with that series or not. So I'm hoping that the Peacock is going to have some really good content. Now, that said, there's been nothing to indicate that any of his properties are going to make this shift over. If we get into this article a little bit, it says Seth MacFarlane has called 20th Century Fox Television and Fox's home for years, but now he's moving over to NBC Universal with a new overall deal. Creator of Family Guy, American Dad, The Cleveland Show, and The Orville will see his Fuzzy Door Productions banner situated at NBC for 5 years, where he will develop TV shows for the company's various networks, including NBC and the upcoming streaming service Peacock. It says Variety has news of Seth MacFarlane's NBC deal that the network struck for $200 million. That's a hefty sum to pay for a creator who hasn't been churning out a lot of hits in recent years. MacFarlane has mostly been riding on the wave of success brought about the revival of Family Guy, one of the first TV shows to be saved after being unceremoniously canceled. But the only recent show from MacFarlane to garner acclaim and attention is The Orville, though I suppose something could be said for the scientific educational series Cosmos, A Space-Time Odyssey, which has earned 13 Emmy nominations. So one of the things that I had read is that this does not cancel the deals at Fox. Okay, so it doesn't mean doesn't mean the Orville is going to NBC or it's being canceled immediately or anything like that. Basically, anything that he's been working on, such as like American Dad, Family Guy, the Orville, the shows that he still has in production are still going to continue, and he's still going to continue to be involved with them. So there's no, I guess, exclusivity to this deal, at least as far as the stuff is concerned that he's already been doing. It was just sort of my pie in the sky hope that maybe the Orville, after all the dust settles, quite frankly, the Orville could be canceled after the next season on Hulu, and then maybe Peacock just picks it up. I think that's a realistic scenario, isn't it? Could happen.
I know, in all honesty, I think what's going to end up happening is that I just can't see Disney wanting to continue to invest in these shows.
But if they canceled the Orville, what prevents the Peacock from just picking it up?
Well, see, my fear is that his current shows, depending upon the deal that he signed, I would be willing to bet that they have an ownership or a vested interest in them in some capacity, and they're not going to be able to just move over. Until we learn more as time goes on, maybe someone will look into this on the entertainment side and actually be able to answer some of these questions, or at least give us, more grounded theories. I just have usually it's one of those things when you go from one place to another place, you don't just get to take whatever IP you've created somewhere else and just roll it over into your new deal, unless
and that's not the case. I mean, that's not the scenario I'm presenting. I said, the pie in the sky hope was, that maybe he would move over to Peacock, but I don't see why, if Fox did decide to stop producing Orville after this next season, I don't see anything that would prevent Peacock from picking it up. That happens all the time. That happens in the regular old network era, where a show got canceled on one network and then the other network just picks it up for another season. And this happens all the time with the streaming stuff. I mean, Amazon does it, Hulu does it. I mean, that's what happened to Orville. Now, granted, Hulu itself is still owned by the same corporate masters, if you will, right? Because, Fox is essentially now part of Disney. Although if you kind of look into the whole Fox deal, that's not quite true, because Disney didn't get the Fox network, for instance. Okay. Fox network was not part of the deal.
Yeah.
So, but in terms of like their content providers, Fox has kind of gotten out of a little bit out of the content creation side. That's all gone to Disney, but they still have the network. Okay. That's just one example. So Fox still exists on that level independently of Disney, and they are a platform, for lack of a better term, kind of getting out of the publisher business and becoming just strictly a platform. So now NBC Universal obviously is doing both. They are producing their own content and they are hosting content. But it's also important to know that NBC used to be a big partner in Hulu. So these companies have relationships with each other, and I just see that the possibility is there that if Hulu and Disney decided to cancel the Orville after the next season, that the Peacock could just pick it right up. I just don't see any reason why they couldn't.
Well, and the Orville, I was looking it up, is considered a joint production between Fuzzy Door Productions and 20th Century Fox. So we'll just have to wait and see. I mean, it would be nice. I'm just fearful, because when I first read this, all I could think of is the amount of fan support and how much people are championing the show and wanting to see the show succeed. And it would be really awful if, they just sign a deal and then the Orville basically dies in the deal.
Yeah.
That's Hollywood, and that sucks, but I'm really hoping that's not the case. But I'm pretty fearful. I mean, we'll see. Time will tell.
That's definitely something that we'll need to follow up with Orville Nation one of these days.
To see if they know something we don't too. Maybe they're more well versed in the ownership rights and what's actually happening with Orville in relation to this particular deal. Because in my mind anyway, that's the big unanswered question surrounding this is, how does this affect the Orville? Most people are just looking at it from a business news standpoint. It's like, wow, Seth MacFarlane's going to get paid a lot of money to go over here and do stuff for NBC Universal. It's like, well, that's great, but what does that mean for the stuff that he's currently producing?
Stuff, they have addressed that in other articles, that the stuff that's being currently produced is still just going to stay where it's at. Okay. There isn't an exclusivity to this deal where basically anything he's working on has to be with NBC. He can continue working on the Orville. He can continue working on Family Guy. He can continue working on American Dad, but not under NBC Universal right now. So none of those things are changing. So he still has to work with Fox Television. He still has to work. I think American Dad is like on TBS, which is Warner Brothers. So he's already had deals with different networks, because American Dad's a good example. American Dad got canceled by Fox and got picked up by TBS, right?
Right.
Family Guy itself was canceled, but then they brought it back on the same network, and then Orville itself was canceled on Fox, and then they brought it back on Hulu. So I'm just saying this stuff happens all the time. Sometimes it takes a little bit of wrangling, but I don't think, even though I have some concerns like you do, I don't think it necessarily means the end of Orville, because I just think that if Disney did decide we really want to de-invest from this guy and we don't really want to support him anymore, I just think that there's a great option for the Peacock or even NBC to just go ahead and just pick it up, whatever the pieces are. So, but as far as right now, anything that's currently in production that McFarlane's been working on, it's just staying where it's at. So that's the current status.
Right, and I understand that. I'm just concerned about beyond season 3.
I am too.
But that's my fear, because I just don't see Disney being okay with this. So
that could very well be the case, but the numbers are what's going to matter. The bottom line is they want to make money. If the Orville is a hit on Hulu, they're not going to get rid of it.
Yeah,
they're going to work with the guy.
Right.
If it's a hit, they're not going to get rid of a hit. It all comes down to dollars and cents, and it comes down to viewership and all that good stuff. So I do think it's funny, though, that as far as the buzz that I've heard, because I actually got this story from a big Orville fan, they all seem really excited about it. Like they think, oh, this is a great thing for McFarlane, and obviously a great thing for him. But I, like you, I do question whether ultimately it's going to be a good thing for Orville fans. That's the big question, and we'll just have to see what happens.
My experience in the entertainment world is that this doesn't mean the end, but it looks like rough sailing ahead. So that's just my thought. I mean, if the Orville is a huge hit on Hulu, they're probably going to be okay. But if the Hulu continues on its trajectory, which it's been doing well, but not a huge breakout hit, as it's moving forward, that's my fear. What happens then? Because then the suits, what's that expression they used to use, the peanut counters or whatever, the money men, they're going to look at this in a different way, and they're going to say, well, here's this show that's got modest ratings and it's been growing, but now it's sort of in a weird clutch 22 or a weird situation. How much more money do we want to keep investing in this guy that signed this huge deal with Universal? That's fear. It's going to go, well, do we want to continue to work with this guy? He's clearly not going to continue to work with us. I don't know. That's my fear. And, sometimes in the entertainment industry, people can be really petty. And I've seen it. They could be incredibly petty, and it can ruin people's careers when people decide to get petty, and it happens. So I hope that my fears for the Orville are just my own, overreaction to what I'm reading. But as a fan of the Orville, I'm a little concerned.
Yes, I share your concern. So it can definitely go that way. But I am offering another path that could happen. So
yeah. I hope your path is right and mine is wrong. We'll have to wait and see. So let's go ahead and move on to streaming wars, unless you have something else.
No, I think we're good. We had quite a lot of news this episode, quite a bit.
Yeah. So here we go with the streaming wars segment. For those that may be new to Retro Rogues, we do a streaming wars segment in addition to our pop culture segment, where we talk about news as far as the various streaming services. Normally from a business aspect, but often from the aspect of how much is this going to cost me and you. So please, Eric, tell me, is there anything interesting that you found for the streaming wars?
Yes, found a few articles, and they're mostly pretty short, but they give some interesting insight from some of the different contenders here. This is a Variety article that is dated January 14th, and it says, Amazon Studios execs on TV streaming wars. We're in a different business. This is kind of funny because if you recall, when we did our sort of recap of 2019, we decided to crown some winners and losers of the streaming wars from 2019. And you mentioned Amazon specifically as a winner, and I mentioned it as an honorable mention because of their because they have the IMDb, the free IMDb stuff, and I always like to promote the free stuff, and Amazon does that now. So, but this is some. These are the suits. You can see them right there in the suits.
Literally.
Yeah, literally. Talking about the streaming wars. It says the streaming wars kick into high gear this year, but Amazon Studios believes it's in an entirely different category. As newcomers such as HBO Max and Peacock enter a crowded landscape recently joined by Disney Plus and Apple TV Plus, Amazon execs told reporters on Tuesday at the Television Critic Association press tour that they're in a different world. It says, quote, "We're in a different business model, unlike the pure play video SVOD, streaming video on demand players," said Amazon Studios Chief Operating Officer and co-TV head Albert Cheng. "For us, it's about Amazon Prime customers, making sure we're delivering value, that we're looking at our content to drive subscriptions. We don't have to play as a substitute for a different type of service or compete in that way." So this is a spin article. That's what this is. This is a complete spin article where I think Amazon is trying to essentially, they're trying to curb expectations because they don't know how this is all going to pan out. It's funny that they would say this because this is really silly in the context of Apple Plus to say something like this. Because, oh yeah, like Apple Plus isn't in a similar situation to you guys, except you guys are actually more established than Apple Plus. Apple obviously is doing other things than strictly a streaming platform. So I just thought this article was kind of funny because, you know, you and I actually were saying that Amazon seemed like they did pretty well this last year. But yeah. I think what they're doing here is they're trying to lower expectations because they're concerned. This track doesn't make any sense. This track would be perfectly fine if the only players were Disney Plus and say, you know, Time Warner and a couple of these other like media companies. But Apple Plus is there. So for them to kind of say, well, we're in a different marketplace. Well, so is Apple. And they're in the middle of this. So I think It's a little bit of a spin article that's just meant to kind of curb expectations.
You know, and it's interesting to me too, because, you know, Amazon, in my mind, you know, when you look at Marvelous Miss Maisel, which has had season 3, which I talked about in the last episode, which was a great season. And then you turn around and you look at The Boys. The Boys was a great surprise. The Boys was a fantastic series that was on Amazon Prime. Amazon is doing some of the best shows, in my humble opinion, on any of these streaming platforms. I mean, Amazon's got some of the best stuff. That's why they were my winner of the year. In the streaming wars. So it is weird to see an article where they're trying to spin stuff when I was the last episode talking about how in my mind they're the winner because they've got some of the best content. Besides it, also having shows like Justified, you know, a lot of these great shows are a part of their Prime service. It's an older show. But it's just, you know, they've got a lot of great content on there that's totally worth the money, especially if you buy enough from Amazon to want to save on the shipping.
I did want to Orville Nation to get back to us, and they did mention from our previous segment about Seth MacFarlane that this is Seth's baby, referring to Orville, and we will have season 11, 12, 13 of the Orville. So, and he concludes by saying, "Don't be concerned, guys." So that's his take on our previous segment. And then we do have a comment for this segment, which is, how is this new world of streaming going to end up being an improvement over cable users? And actually, that's one of our big angles with our streaming wars coverage, right, Dave?
Exactly.
How is it going to be any better than cable? Or are we going right back to cable all over again? Is that where the streaming wars are going to lead? And again, it's funny what Amazon is putting out there. You know, kind of like I said, to me, this article is all about curbing expectations and keeping them low. That people are like, hey, Amazon's obviously going to be fine because it is true. They do have a different business model than a lot of these other companies, these other media companies, because they're involved with all sorts of other things. But I do think it's funny because like we were praising Amazon the other day, you know what I mean, as far as their position in the streaming wars. I still think they're in a good position. But you know, there are going to be a lot more competitors. And I think that they're wisely kind of realizing that they do have to kind of they do kind of have to curb expectations from their investors and things like that. That hey, even if we do become losers in the streaming wars, we still got plenty of other stuff going on for us, and we'll be fine. That's kind of the take I get from the article, is that even if we end up losing the streaming wars, we'll be fine.
And
We will survive.
yeah, and yet, like I said, it's like, they've got some of the best content, and up until this last year, they were winning a lot of awards for the content they have been producing. And like I said, for me, the big surprise was how great The Boys was, on Amazon. They've got a lot of great things in the pipeline. It's just weird to see them backpedaling when, in my mind, I see them as a standout winner, in terms of the content they have produced. So we'll see.
But they definitely don't have the deep content of Time Warner and NBC Universal. And that might be why they're putting that stuff out there, is because they realize they don't have the amount of content that they're going to be providing,
Right. Well, we'll see.
They aren't even in the same category when it comes to that. That's the same issue that Apple Plus has, actually. Apple Plus has very limited content. This is another article. This is from Benzinga Pro, I think is what it's called. So this is a quote from an executive. Says Netflix, Amazon, best positioned in the streaming wars. We just said Amazon was just lowering expectations, right?
Yeah.
So there's all sorts of hot takes on the state of the streaming wars and things like that. That's why I like to talk about this stuff, because everybody has a position, and some of these positions are interesting. So it says Netflix and Amazon are the best positioned companies to take advantage of the movement towards streaming entertainment. This is Nomura Instant said in a new look at the industry. It says, while Netflix, the pioneering early giant in the space, while Netflix is the pioneering early giant in the space, and Amazon look best among the companies providing streaming services, Apple may have the most in question position in the new business. This is an analyst. His name is Mark Kelly, said, citing the high price and relatively small library of the computing giant Apple Plus's streaming service, which I think is a great weakness of Apple Plus right now. To succeed, streaming services need a mix of splashy new frontline content to lure customers in and try out the service, and then also need a long tail library to keep users engaged after consuming the initial hits, Kelly wrote in a note. Netflix and Amazon are the two companies that have both. And then he gets into Peacock and HBO. It says Peacock and HBO have good libraries. The new Peacock streaming service from Comcast Corporation, NBC, which will be unveiled this week and start streaming in April, will have a strong library with a large catalog of TV and movie hits, including The Office. AT&T's HBO also has decades of programming from its long-lasting cable network that give it a strong, diverse library, Kelly said. Apple Plus and Walt Disney Company's Disney Plus streaming services, on the other hand, have had the flashy, reel-them-in content. Disney, for example, has gotten headlines and social media traction from Baby Yoda in his new Mandalorian show, while Apple Plus made a splash last year with some star-studded new exclusive shows like The Morning Show, Jennifer Aniston, and Reese Witherspoon. By the way, I would argue that's just not true. The Morning Show, yes, it got a Golden Globe or nomination at least or whatever, but it doesn't have nearly the buzz of, say, The Mandalorian.
Yeah, I don't see anyone, in all honesty, I don't see anyone talking about the Apple Plus shows. The only time I ever hear anyone talking about it, just in general conversation, people are still perplexed by that C show where everybody's blind. People are just like, I don't know, that just seems weird. I'm not, and I haven't heard anyone really talking about the morning show either. Even though I keep hearing the news media talking about the morning show, I'm not hearing anybody talk about it.
Me either. The main coverage I heard about it is because of the Golden Globe nomination. Which I don't know if they won or not. I didn't follow that one. So it says, but both the depth of both networks offerings beyond the headline grabbers may not be as strong as that of Netflix or Amazon. Bottom line, a positive NFLX, a path for HBO Max and Peacock, lukewarm for AAPL, Kelly wrote. So it talks about their shares and things like that. So this particular analyst is basically saying that he feels that because of their catalog, Netflix and Amazon are actually in a very good position, and HBO and Peacock will be in a very good position, and Apple and Disney perhaps not, which is kind of an interesting thing to say about Disney. But, as far as content goes, Netflix is going to be losing lots of their content.
Yeah.
They produce a lot of content, but as far as the legacy content, they're going to lose a lot of it. The deals are expiring with Disney. The deals are expiring with other networks. Everybody's trying to get their IP back because everybody's going to have their own streaming service now. So everybody's trying to get their IP back, and that is going to hit Netflix. Netflix is going to have to rely even more on their new content. And we've talked about this. That's putting Netflix into major debt. I mean, Netflix has a huge revenue stream because of their huge subscription base, but they are going into debt because they're trying to produce so much content. And they're producing content at a high level with big name stars and things like that. And that means big budgets and spending a ton of money. So it's kind of interesting because I think he's right in this article. He basically says you have to have the right combination of something fun, new, trendy that's going to get attention, but then you also have to have a massive catalog behind you to keep people there. That's what Netflix has had in the past. But the question is, will Netflix still have that? Because all these other streaming companies and all these other studios are taking content away that used to be on Netflix. And so then again, they have to rely more and more on their original new content.
And it's interesting too, because it's like with Netflix specifically, I think it's like, well, as they're losing they're going to call it their legacy brands or legacy shows they had that they've been able to lean on, things like Friends and The Office. As they're losing that content, for example, Lost in Space Season 2, just came out. And I talked about how much I enjoyed Lost in Space Season 1, and I was looking forward to watching some of Lost in Space Season 2. I'm not seeing anyone talk about Lost in Space Season 2. And that's kind of...
you did.
I mean, I did. I mean, beyond me, I'm not seeing anyone else talk about it. And that's what I'm saying. That's the problem. It's like, I'm on that verge of just getting rid of Netflix, and then here's Lost in Space Season 2. Okay, well, I'll stick around and watch Lost in Space Season 2. What have you got past that, though? That's the issue. It's like, is Ozark, Season 3 or whatever getting ready to come out? Like, what, because that's where they're at. I watched The Irishman. It was okay. I mean, I feel like I'd already kind of seen this movie when I watched the Jack Nicholson Hoffa movie or whatever. So I don't know.
I started watching The Irishman, and I was looking forward to it because I'm a big Joe Pesci fan, and this is the return of Joe Pesci, right? And I love that team. Casino is one of my favorite movies of all time. I love Casino. I own that movie. I watch it all the time, and for different reasons, because there's so much in that movie. And I started watching The Irishman, and I think I got within 5 minutes. And I said, you know what? I'm going to watch something else right now. It just wasn't drawing me. And I do plan to watch it, because I want to watch it all the way through. I'm going to force myself, even if I don't like it at some point. But I've had that experience with a lot of Netflix stuff.
That's a great... Go ahead.
I've just had that experience with a lot of Netflix stuff. Like I'll be sitting there and I'll be trying to find something on Netflix. Like I need to watch The Witcher. In fact, I think that might be something we should do on a future show is The Witcher. I want to watch it. But a lot of times the stuff just doesn't grab me right away. And the only reason I even knew about The Witcher is because I've heard other people talking about it. And I have Netflix, but I'm not on that platform all that much. My kids are my kids are definitely on it way more than I am. And so, I don't know. I think Netflix basically their feeling is because their subscription base is so much larger than anybody else's, they don't need to advertise. They don't need to promote anything. They just think that people are just going to find the content on their platform because they think that people are on their platform all the time. And I don't think that's the case anymore. I think that used to be the case because there was nobody else to go to. When there was nobody else to go to, people just hung out on Netflix and would search. And back in the early days of Netflix, there weren't that many good movies. And people would just sit there searching, trying to find something to watch because there was no alternative. Now that I can go to Disney Plus, now that I can go to other platforms, I can go to Tubi, I could go to Amazon, even though I don't have Amazon Prime, and I can watch IMDb movies for free. I can go to Crackle. I can go to all sorts of other platforms. I don't have to sit on Netflix all day trying to find something that I like.
Well, so it's go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and their update to their interface, I feel like actually obscures their content. It makes it even harder. Have you noticed how, like, when you click over it, like it mouses over and it opens up like a big window and it gives you all the information and the Rotten Tomatoes rating and all this other stuff, but it covers up everything that's right next to it. And it's like, you can't, I mean, I feel like their updates, their interface is actually hurting them because they're actually hiding their content even more. And that's kind of the issue. It's like, I don't know. We'll have to see. We're going to see how the streaming wars unfolds, but I feel like that a lot of the original movies that Netflix has been doing for the my wife and I, we watched Marriage Story. Marriage Story was good, a bit of a downer, obviously, because it's about a family getting divorced, a lot of crying and nonsense. But it was a well put together film, for what it was. And we watched Unbelievable, I think, actually on Netflix. And Unbelievable was really great. So Netflix does have a lot of really great content. But it's one of those things that just, for example, I don't hear anyone talking about Unbelievable. We only watched Unbelievable because Caitlin Dever got a nomination on the Golden Globes, and we went, huh, what is that? Because we liked her in Booksmart, and I really enjoyed her.
I think we lost the stream for a second, Dave, because you were talking about what Netflix has or doesn't have, and then it kind of went out. But
I was just talking about I was backing up what you were saying about the fact that they just don't do, in my mind, they're not doing a very good job of making sure people are aware of the great content that is even on Netflix. Yeah. So, and I was talking about Unbelievable, which is a show I mentioned earlier, which is a show that Michael Chabon was tying it back into Picard. It's one of his shows that he actually has worked in a producerial capacity on. And I think he actually wrote one or two of the episodes. Unbelievable is a great show. But the only reason we know about it is because they got a Golden Globe nomination. We saw Caitlin Dever was nominated, and we liked her in Booksmart, and which Booksmart was a great film. And then I, in the process of rewatching Justified, and she was great in Justified. And I was like, I wonder what the Unbelievable show is. And then my wife went and found it on Netflix and went, hey, let's watch this and check it out. And it's got like Toni Collette. It's got like a great cast. It's all based off of true events. And it's a really great show. Very well written, greatly acted. I mean, it's really, really good. And I'm just shocked because it's like I'm not seeing a lot of people talk about Unbelievable beyond the fact that it received a nomination on the Golden Globes. And it's a great show. And that's a Netflix show. And it's just one of those things. That's the thing. They've got lots of great content on there, but I'm not sure people are finding it or discovering it. Now, they may have the stats that prove that that's not true, but because, there's no transparency, we as, commenting from the outside as commenters, as reviewers, we don't really see that. So it's hard to know if, internally Netflix is winning the war, but from the outside looking in, it just looks like they've got an awful lot of great content that I just don't see a lot of people talking about.
Well, a great example of that is the review that we did a while back of Living with Yourself. And I think we were questioning even going forward with that because we were like, is anybody going to really care, regardless of what we think or anything like that? Because the show just wasn't getting the buzz that I think was expected, especially with Paul Rudd. Paul Rudd's a pretty hot actor. And it was kind of crazy the lack of interest there seemed to be in that show, which I thought was very creative. I think our big take was it was like a really cool long Twilight Zone episode,
Yeah.
And it was a neat premise, and it was basically like a mini series. It was only a few episodes. I think 6 or 8, and they were half-hour episodes.
Yeah.
So it wasn't a big time commitment either. And I only heard about it because you had watched it and said, "We want to check this out." Otherwise, I wouldn't have heard of it.
Yeah.
So there's a problem there, and like I said, I think the numbers can be deceiving because right now Netflix is still in a dominant position because they have so many more subscribers than any other service. I think that's going to change. Over time, that's going to change. I think there are people that are going to dump Netflix because they're going to be interested in whatever's flashy or new on these other services that are going to be heavily promoted. as opposed to the Netflix stuff, which isn't.
Yeah.
It's just not. It's not heavily promoted. That they rely on their own internal platform, which I think does a bad job of promoting new content, I think, quite frankly. So I have one last article here, and this kind of gets into what we've talked about quite a bit. This is from the Hollywood Reporter, and it says the Discovery CEO predicts few platforms will survive the streaming wars, which is something we've talked about since the beginning. This article was dated January 8th. So the Discovery CEO basically was talking to his shareholders, and his name is David Zaslav. He says that the company has exceeded its goal of $3 billion in annual free cash flow ahead of schedule, and will roll out HDTV in 12 new markets. And HDTV, I think, has been doing pretty well as far as a platform, because what they do is they focus on that sort of reality TV, except it's actual more like reality TV. It's like little mini documentaries of like house flipping and things like that, and not so much of like the Kim Kardashian kind of drama, fake reality TV, you know? So Discovery president and CEO David Zaslav told an investor conference Wednesday that a bigger company would have to acquire the company if it wanted to beef up its streaming content offering with Discovery programming, as the non-scripted lifestyle content giant is well positioned to go it alone. So in other words, he's saying that I guess they're at a crossroads, I think is what he's trying to say, is that if they want to be any bigger than they already are, they're probably going to have to be acquired by someone. But he's also saying we don't have to do that. We're in a good enough position where we don't have to be acquired by a bigger company. But if we want to expand, that's pretty much what we're going to have to do. So speaking at the City 22 Global TMT West Conference in Las Vegas in a session which was webcast, he was also asked about the future of consolidation and the streaming wars, predicting that there would be only 2 or 3 streaming war survivors, while other services would likely tip over. But while most entertainment giants fight over the same limited scripted content pie, Discovery can focus on the much less crowded non-scripted part of the market, he reiterated. So what he's trying to say is that Discovery is in a unique position because they do create new content, and that's their bread and butter, is they create new content, but they have a completely different way of creating their content. They go more with this sort of, documentary style, reality TV, which is much cheaper to produce. And he feels that they're in a much better position than a lot of these other streaming services and networks right now that are all competing over big stars and scripted content and things like that.
And yet that was your argument for why, YouTube is in a unique position as well, except the difference is YouTube is able to get the same kind of content, but they're not even paying for the people that are producing it.
Right.
So this goes to bolster the argument for YouTube from the last episode.
So the big question that of course, for his investors, it says, does Discovery need to become part of a bigger media company amid the streaming wars? Zaslav said, there is a very good argument that we are fine, adding, we couldn't be much bigger in terms of non-scripted content. But at the same time, every one of those bigger players doesn't have enough content. Every one of them has come to us and said, you have a huge library in women, a huge library in family. Your content library itself is bigger than Netflix as a whole. We need more bulk. We need more great characters. So we've had discussions about doing things with others. Zaslav added, but in the end, we came to the conclusion that we may have enough to go ourselves. And if we are going to go with someone else, they really need to buy us. Because if we gave our content to somebody else to fill out one of the other big players, then we would be giving away really the future of our company. Discovery executives recently started saying that the TV giant would launch a U.S. streaming service aggregating all its programming. Zaslav said Wednesday that we are looking hard at that. He later added that Discovery cannot be a growth business by just staying on the existing platforms in the U.S., given that there are fans of the firm's brands who are not pay TV subscribers. Says we have hundreds of thousands of hours that people grew up on, he had said in 2019. We are looking now at whether we should just aggregate if we should just aggregate all of our content in the U.S. have something that looks very different, and having something that looks very different is very deep, has great personalities, great brands to curate through. So it's an interesting take. First of all, he's obviously saying that he doesn't think very many of these streaming platforms will survive, but he's mentioning the sort of the unique position that Discovery is in because they have a huge amount of content and because they produce their content in a different way than most of these other players. So, getting back to this question we had earlier, how is the new world of streaming going to end up being an improvement over cable users? I don't know, but I will say that it's going to either go that way, it's going to become cable all over again, or just as this CEO says, you're going to wind up with like 2 or 3 of these streaming services because the other ones are all going to go away. It's going to be one or the other. That's the way I look at it.
It's weird because if we only end up with 2 or 3 streaming services at the end, it's almost like going back actually to the old network system, where there were 3 major networks and there was a couple of little outliers, and that was pretty much it. And they were in a position to, be kingmakers and, pick what people are going to watch and program for the majority of viewers, just because they controlled all the access.
Yeah, well, that's actually what he just said. He's saying like 3. It would be like the big 3 all over again. He didn't come to that conclusion, but he that's basically what he said, because he's saying that he thinks like basically like 3 of these platforms will probably make it when it's all said and done. So we'll be literally back to the big 3 networks all over again, depending on what those networks are. But that's the position that he's kind of predicting there. While also mentioning that his own company is in a very unique position because of the way they make their content.
Right. Well, yeah. Do you have anything else for the streaming wars?
No, that's all I have.
Okay, cool. Well, let's go ahead and move into actually our main content, if that's okay.
That sounds good to me.
If you wouldn't mind sharing my screen, we're going to start off with our first thing that we're talking about on the road less traveled to Picard. We're actually going to be talking about, Eric's going to be taking a lead on this one, Star Trek Operation Assimilation. This is a comic book that was published in April of 1997. It was written by Paul Jenkins, who I once upon a time worked with, just very briefly, on a world record attempt comic book at the amazing Arizona Comic-Con. Enough about that. The artists on this were Steve Irwin and Terry Pallett. This was actually published by Marvel Comics. This is actually after Marvel Comics managed to wrest the license away from DC, because DC had been publishing most of the Star Trek comics up until that point. Had 26 pages. And then the editor I'm not going to mention because he once upon a time passed over me to ink an issue of Hulk Family with my friend Scott Clark, and I'm still bitter about it. All right, wow. So yeah. Anyhow, Star Trek Operation Assimilation. Now, I did have a hand in picking this particular comic to talk about because I thought it was oddly relevant because, as you can clearly tell, we have a Romulan here who's been turned into a Borg. Considering the obvious connections between the Borg and apparently the Romulans in the new Picard series, while this is probably obviously not canon, I did think it would be kind of an interesting thing to talk about, just to see kind of the ideas that other people have explored in relation to Next Generation, Romulans, and the Borg connections. So tell me, Eric, what did you think about this issue, Star Trek Operation Assimilation?
Well, I had never even heard of this comic book until you brought it to my attention. And I'm really glad that you brought it up, because the theme of our main topic here is the road less traveled to Picard, because we're going to talk about some things that we don't think other people are really talking about. We're going to have another show with our lead up to Picard next week. We're going to have special guests, and we're going to really get into some of the big legacy characters like Picard, Data, Seven, some of their sort of the must-reads, the must-watch stories, whether it be books, comics, television shows. But we figured nobody was really going to talk about this stuff. So we were like, this was I think a great piece of content in that vein. So Operation Assimilation, I'll just sort of break it down, is basically the story of a Romulan commander who has been sent to a world where there was a recent revolt. And so it's basically a Romulan colony, and it's kind of interesting because it actually kind of ties into Picard Countdown. Because what has happened is that basically there's this Romulan colony with an indigenous population, and they have revolted. And so she comes in as a commander of actually a very weak ship. It's basically like a Romulan scout ship. If you remember the Romulan scout ship from the Next Gen era,
right.
That's basically what her ship is. In fact, they even say she doesn't even have a cloaking device. But she's kind of the kind of picture you're getting is that she's basically like in the outer rim territories of the Romulan Empire, cruising around. And there's been this revolt. So she's been sent to quash it, which she does. She quashes this revolt. She actually apparently kills the Romulan governor because she holds him responsible for the revolt, and does her business and leaves. But I found that really interesting. That's the intro to the story, and that actually ties in kind of to Picard Countdown, the recent Picard Countdown comic, because they have a very similar situation going on of a indigenous population on a Romulan colony that's revolted. So it's neat to me to see that this idea was already out there, and this comic, of course, was made in the First Contact era, around the time that First Contact came out. It was kind of a tie-in to First Contact. So
and it tied into or referenced Neutral Zone, didn't it? Star Trek Next Generation Neutral Zone.
Well, absolutely, yeah. So as the story progresses, the Romulan commander is out, doing her patrol, and they realize that some unidentified ship is entering Romulan space. Again, it seems like she's sort of like on the border. She's like a scout craft. She's just cruising around in the outer rim of the Romulan Empire again, if you will. And they realize, we realize because we know more than them, the ship that they've detected is a Borg cube. Now, one of the cool things about this this comic book, and it relates actually very well to the Picard Countdown comic book, is this character is extremely arrogant and extremely like racist, just like Romulan, very dedicated to the Romulan Empire, and just looks at herself and her culture as being superior to all others, including the Federation and the Klingons. And so when she first encounters this Borg cube, even though she's sitting in a Romulan scout vessel, she's not worried. And of course, we know better because it's like, okay, I've seen the Romulan scout vessel before, and he's like, and we're talking about a Borg cube here. So we know things are not going to go well for this character. But in her mind, she's not even worried, because she feels that the Romulans are superior to everything, and it's not going to be a problem. She's actually kind of upset because she feels that she should be on a full warbird. She should have a higher status. She's kind of lamenting the status that she's on, that she's having to deal with these backwater worlds, if you will. So she thinks that the Borg are going to be no problem. And when they first kind of encounter the Borg, it's very similar to what happens in Q Who. I say Q Who in that episode, when the Enterprise first encounters the Borg. It's a very similar thing that happens with them. The Borg initially put their tractor beam onto the ship. The Romulans fire their weapons, which damages the Borg cube, and they stop the initial attack. But then, of course, what happens is the Borg ship heals itself. Once she sees that, she starts to realize she's in trouble because she's never seen that before. She's never seen a ship heal itself, and she realizes that she might be outclassed. But because of her Romulan arrogance, she continues the conflict. And it's kind of interesting because they actually show the Romulans are obviously very aggressive and relentless themselves, but it kind of shows how the Borg overwhelm them as they're basically fighting on the ship and everything like that. It's a pretty neat story. So the way that it ends up is that the Romulan commander, of course, is absorbed, and they actually go through the process of her absorption as she's losing her memories and all that kind of stuff, and losing her individuality, and then she becomes a Borg. And then basically the last scene is now a full Romulan warbird, okay, coming across this cube, and now of course the spokesperson is her, the commander. She's been absorbed, and of course that means she has all of the knowledge of the Romulan Empire, and they're about to get blown to smithereens. So it was a really a good book. I thought it was really interesting, and it's kind of funny because it ties in very well to the Star Trek Countdown comic book. It has a lot of the same themes, all that kind of stuff. Obviously, this is really supposed to be the first contact of the Romulans with the Borg and the first assimilation of the Romulans by the Borg. And the idea that this character that we see on the cover here, she was this sort of obscure Romulan commander, and she became kind of the locutus, if you will, for the Romulans, for the Borg to be able to chop them up. And of course, that leads us to the TNG episode that we reviewed last week, which is Neutral Zone, where we find out, yes, indeed, the Borg have been destroying Romulan outposts along the border of the Neutral Zone.
Yeah, it was interesting because we were talking about looking for, something interesting to lead up to Picard, because everyone's leading up to Picard, but we wanted to find some content that could be uniquely ours, that not many people are going to be talking about. And when we were talking about it, I really wanted to do some more comic book stuff, because I like having comic book stuff, focused and kind of featured for the show, for my own personal, proclivity or whatever. And it was interesting because when I was going through stuff looking for something, my initial thought was I thought we would actually talk about, it's actually for the DC Comics series, there was a two-parter, again, focusing on the Romulans. But this would have actually been the Red Tunic, motion picture, Enterprise crew era. And it was actually a story that involved Savick, and actually reintroduced the character of Zahn, who was actually going to be a Star Trek Phase 2 character. We talked about Phase 2 when we did our actual retrospective review of Star Trek the Motion Picture on its anniversary. And so I was originally thinking we would lean towards that, because that story has a lot to do with the Romulans in terms of like how they've always been portrayed a very certain way. And then that one, what they're actually doing is they're actually experimenting on Vulcans. They find some Vulcans and they basically trap them, and they're trying to find a way to, through study and kind of torture, actually weaponize the Vulcans' mental abilities in terms of like, like the mind melts and stuff, and finding ways to actually weaponize that. And so I was originally thinking that was probably what we're going to look at doing. And as I was going through kind of the archives and finding and looking for something, I just kind of stumbled across this. The cover was what initially caught my attention. And I was like, wow, this is crazy. There was a Star Trek comic book that specifically involved the Romulans and the Borg. Dead on, no blinking, flinching, just dead on, Romulan Borg, here's the story. And I was like, wow, this is like tailor-made to talk about in the lead up for Picard. So it's a very interesting thing to find. It's curious that there's a lot of information about it on the internet, but I've been surprised that no one's been really kind of looking at this. And so I think this is something kind of unique just for our show. And I greatly appreciate you going along with my wanting to continue to cover comics, content, even though obviously Countdown directly relates to Picard. This is just an interesting artifact that people were already curious about, what could have possibly happened, between the Romulans and the Borg in the next gen era. I just found it to be just terribly, terribly interesting.
Yeah, I really appreciated this recommend, because I read it in a digital version, and I'm going to seek the physical copy because for one thing, I love the cover, but I'm a physical copy person, but I liked the story enough. It was intriguing enough to me that I definitely want to add this to my collection. I thought it was a really intriguing comic, and it's not going to be contradicted in Picard. I can guarantee you that almost. I don't think they're going to get into the quote unquote first contact of the Romulans and the Borg. They might, but I don't think they will. I think it'll be kind of mysterious. And this is basically the story of how that happened. And again, I think it's really interesting how the events in this book do tie in terms of the theme, in terms of some of the plotting, almost directly into what we see in Star Trek Picard, Star Trek Picard Countdown, the Countdown comic book, because we don't really see the Romulans interacting with their constituent planets very much.
Right.
We saw a little bit, obviously, in Nemesis with the Remans, but up to that point, we really never heard anything about how does the Romulan Empire work. There's kind of this weird assumption almost that they're just a bunch of colonies, meaning that they just spread out among the universe. And I was always like, well, they're an empire. That's not how empires colonize. Empires colonize places where people are already at, and they exploit them and they take them over. And that, to me, was something intriguing in Star Trek Countdown. And they have the same premise in this book, which is that she's basically dealing with a revolt in one of these sort of outer colonies, if you will. But they have a native population, and it's a native population that's been giving them problems. So, and she's just brutal. She's just completely arrogant, as far as that they're just like subhuman, very much like in the Star Trek Countdown comic book. It's the same attitude. So I thought that to me was intriguing. It almost makes you wonder if somebody at IDW or something, or somebody in terms of this some sort of story group at CBS kind of threw that out there, and said, hey, well, there was this comic book where they did this, and they were kind of like, maybe we could use that, So I think it actually relates very well. It's a kind of a nice complementary piece to the current Star Trek Picard Countdown comic book. And then also what's interesting is this is a First Contact era book. So they have a nice little interview with Jonathan Frakes about the making of First Contact, which was big news at the time. That was the first feature film that Jonathan Frakes had directed. So they have a nice little interview with him. And they have a nice history of the Borg, where they basically go through the history of the Borg from Neutral Zone, and they do reference Neutral Zone all the way until, I think, First Contact. So even though Voyager had started by this time, Voyager had not had any Borg episodes yet. So there's nothing about the Borg in Voyager, but they get all the way up to First Contact and talk about the Borg Queen and all that stuff. And it's a nice little history. So even from that perspective, it's kind of a very useful in terms of just if you're not that familiar with the history of the Borg, there's a nice little write-up like at the end of this book. It's like 2 or 3 pages where they just go through everything up to that point, up to First Contact. And that's, to me, when the Borg were really cool too. It's just like, I kind of wanted to give a shout out because you don't hear too much about this particular Star Trek creator. And here we go. All right. This is the man who created the Borg. This is the man that is responsible for the Borg. Not necessarily as we know them today, especially in light of Voyager and the circumstances that they apparently are in Star Trek Picard, but this is the original creator of the Borg. And he's sort of a controversial figure in Trek history. His name is Maurice Hurley. And Maurice Hurley was basically one of the first showrunners for the first 2 seasons of Star Trek The Next Generation. And if you've ever seen the documentary Chaos on the Bridge, he's actually featured very prominently in that. And they address many of the controversies of his tenure on that documentary. I think that's a really good documentary if anybody's interested in the early days of Star Trek The Next Generation. And the thing that I always thought was so cool is that the original premise that he came up with was very simple. He wanted to have an enemy that was unbeatable. And unfortunately, Trek kind of got away from that. But the original attitude, the original idea there was very powerful. It reminds me of the whole thing with Q and Picard admitting he was out of his league. He was out of his depth. You know what I mean?
Right.
And you just don't see that anymore. You just don't see that anymore in anything. It's to have the hero basically say, yeah, I can't beat these guys. And then, of course, the best of both worlds, which is a classic beyond classic, and it all leads up to that, and Picard himself becoming assimilated. But I just wanted to give some shout outs to the creator of the Borg, and the fact that I know he is somewhat of a controversial person in Trek. This is the man who fired Gates McFadden. He did all sorts of other things that are considered very controversial, but this is the guy who created the Borg, and if it wasn't for him, we would have no Borg. And so he's very relevant to the stories that we're talking about today.
Cool. So for our second thing that we wanted to talk about here on the road less traveled to Picard, we were going to talk about the Star Trek Next Generation episode Tapestry. Let me pull up the graphic here. So I've got a graphic there on the screen. Eric and I are both big fans of the Red Tunic era, or the motion picture era for Star Trek. So it's kind of fun to see Captain Picard in the classic Red Tunic era, the more Napoleonic kind of look. So Tapestry was, of course, important episode of Star Trek The Next Generation. It's one of my personal favorites. It was in season 6. It aired on February 15th, 1993. It was actually written by Ronald D. Moore, probably, in my opinion, one of the better writers that we've had in Trek, of the newer stuff for sure. And then the director was Les Landau. This episode, I remember seeing it on television and was thoroughly kind of surprised at it, because it starts off with Picard essentially looking as if he's just died. And then obviously he passes to the afterlife, where Q is basically waiting for him and basically kind of states that, you know what, you're going to basically travel with me from now on since you're dead. And we learn an awful lot about how Picard was actually right out of the academy. We learn about the incident that caused him to have basically a device that replaces his heart, because his heart was actually stabbed and pierced by a Nausicaan blade. We kind of see some of his classmates, or shipmates as it were, from the academy, and kind of just learn an interesting thing about who Picard was in his early days. He in kind of a we'll call it a what's the name of that movie? The classic movie where the guy gets to go back and change. Why am I blanking on it? It's a Wonderful Life. So the story unfolds kind of like It's a Wonderful Life, in that Q grants Picard's wish to kind of go back in time and actually fix what he believes are these personal defects in his personality and the choices that he made as a young man. And then we literally see, as Picard states in the episode, he pulls on those strands and that tapestry and unravels, the tapestry of his life, which is where the name of the show comes from. It's a very interesting show because I felt like it's a very interesting examination of Picard as a character and how he feels about mistakes. Particularly because I'm curious to see how this is going to be reflected in Picard, because based off the trailers for Picard, we're going to see him in a similar place where he regrets decisions that he's made. And I'm curious to see if he learned the lesson that Q was trying to teach him, or if he didn't learn the lesson that Q was trying to help teach him. So we'll see how it kind of unfolds. So tell me, Eric, what are your feelings about the episode Tapestry?
I've always really enjoyed this particular episode. I remember it was really interesting because this is one of the few Star Trek Next Generation episodes that has anything to do with any kind of religious or supernatural or spiritual themes, because for the most part, the Next Generation stayed away from that kind of stuff. I remember my dad commenting on that we thought that was kind of interesting. This whole idea that Q was some sort of god, and that he was interacting with Picard's spirit, Right. That was pretty interesting. And of course, they leave it open ended because we don't know. They even say at the end, was that really Q, or was that just a delusion in Picard's mind, of him working through this whole process in his head? And they left it open-ended, which I like. So it was open to interpretation about what actually happened. So yeah, it's one of my I don't know if it's exactly in my top 10, but it's definitely one of those, as far as like Picard episodes, it's probably one of my top 10. It's a very good episode. We get a lot of background on Picard. We did hear earlier about how this happened. There was a previous episode where Picard is going to get a new heart. That's in the second season, and he's talking to Wesley, because him and Wesley are actually traveling together, and he tells Wesley the story of how he ended up with an artificial heart. And so that's also nice, because this is kind of a follow-up to that. And you didn't really get a lot of that in Next Generation, where you had some sort of a kernel of an idea in a previous episode, and then they actually expound on it on a later episode. So
right.
I like that too. It's unique in that respect, because obviously Star Trek: The Next Generation is very episodic in nature. It's not serialized, but that's one of those examples of where they took something that was established all the way back in the second season. I believe this is in the last season of Star Trek. So it's kind of neat that they came back to this idea and said, hey, let's do a little bit more about this, because remember, Picard is the kind of guy that, he would regret a decision like that, because Picard is a very different person than he was when he was young. And we see that in this episode, that Picard in his youth was a hellraiser. He was very undisciplined. And it's kind of neat to see that there was some sort of progression with Picard, that he wasn't always the way that he was. He used to be a very reckless person, very reckless, young officer. And it's completely different than what he is in the series. In the series, he's probably one of the most disciplined people on the show. In fact, there's, in the episode of, Unification with Spock, there's that moment where Spock actually says there's a very Vulcan quality to Picard. And I agree. There's a very Vulcan quality to Picard. He's probably the most rational, disciplined human that you see in the Star Trek universe. And to see that he used to not be that way, I think it's fun. It's a lot of fun to see the way that he used to be. And he used to be a womanizer, you know what I mean? Yeah. And of course now it's like he hardly ever has a girlfriend, But
right.
Back in the day, he was out there carousing. He was getting into fights with Nausicaans, all sorts of different things. And then, of course, the overall message of this episode, I think, is really good. The tapestry of our lives as it goes. And the idea, because so many of us, I think, have legitimate issues in our lives that we wish we could do over, that we wish we could get rid of, or we wish we could do over. And we really don't know what kind of effect it would have on the rest of our life. Interestingly enough, I think the Orville kind of hit on this, right? The Orville kind of hit on this idea of the tapestry of our lives, because in the Orville, they had an episode where it turned out that the captain and the first officer had never gotten together. Remember that? That's like at the end of the second season. Have you seen that episode?
Yeah, it's a great episode.
So what of course happens is, and this is just a little bit of a spoiler, because I won't say what happens at the end of the episode, but the setup is that the captain and the first officer were never married. They never went out with each other. And it destroyed the entire universe, basically. I mean, it was like it had that effect. And in this particular episode, what Q does is he takes away the element of, for instance, what would have happened if Picard wasn't at the battle for Earth with the Borg and all that kind of stuff. He kind of takes that away and says, I'm not going to allow history to be changed at all, because Q has that power, but your life will change. That's it, So that he kind of took that off the table of the bigger ramifications of Picard's life going a different way. And the state that Picard is in, after the change is pretty funny and humiliating. I call him boring Picard, the Picard in the blue suit.
Right.
I think that was pretty funny that he's a lieutenant junior grade. He's like an assistant in the I don't know, what was it, like the
I think it was like astrophysics or something like that.
Yeah. He is obviously in the science division, and he's just basically, you can You can see him. He's just like probably just like doing data collection. Like he's just like absolutely nobody on the ship. And to be a lieutenant junior grade when Picard is obviously over 50 years old, and that's pretty bad to be lieutenant junior grade.
Well, I personally, I've always loved this episode. It's one of my favorite episodes of The Next Generation. I always find this episode to be very reflective. I think that's why I enjoy it so much, just because I think, like you said, all of us have those moments in our lives when we think, maybe I should have turned left instead of turning right, when you come to that fork in a road. And you always wonder, if I'd done this instead of this other thing, how would things have turned out? Would things genuinely be better, or would they be worse? And the lesson to take away from this episode is pretty clear. And I think it still resonates. And in that sense, it reminds me of like a classic, original series episode. And then it takes sort of like this kind of moral premise or this concept of, the choices that we make and how it affects ourselves and others. Yeah, I just thought this would be, again, we had discussed it and we both agreed this would be a fun episode to talk about because of how it specifically relates to Picard. And I'm really curious to see in the new show that'll be starting soon, if he still has learned the lessons, from this particular episode, or if he's still, I think as all of us do at some point in our lives, questioning, I should have done this or I shouldn't have done that. Maybe things would be different. Maybe things would be better. So I think those ideas are universal and constant. But this is just, like I said, one of my personal favorite episodes. Great performances by everyone all the way around. I quite like the fight choreography of Picard fighting the Nausicaans and kind of how that plays out. It reminds me of an original series. You can see Kirk, fighting that way. It's the most, I think, in a way, with Picard specifically, I think it's the most Kirk we ever see him is in this particular episode. And that's kind of fun to see him in that role, being sort of the bare knuckles, kind of captain, carousing around. And it's just kind of fun to see Picard in that role. And the disdain with which he looks at it now, as an older man, looking back on the mistakes of his youth, as it were. So I personally feel like this is an episode definitely worth revisiting before watching Picard, because I think in its own way, it is going to be relatable. And I'm just really curious to see if Picard's learned the lessons from this particular episode.
That's a great point you bring up, because in a lot of ways, I feel like this episode is actually going to be a mirror image of Star Trek Picard. The Picard of Star Trek Picard, I think, absolutely has forgotten this lesson. I think that he regrets what happened during the evacuation of Romulus. That he regrets perhaps a lot of things in his life. But most certainly, there's some sort of trauma that got Picard out of Starfleet. And I don't know if he would do things differently if he had the chance. But that's kind of the feeling I get when I'm watching the trailers for Star Trek Picard, is that he definitely is a man full of regret. So I think in a lot of ways, this episode is actually going to be a mirror image of what we get in Star Trek Picard.
Cool. That's an interesting observation. So I think with this that we're probably pretty good for this episode. Do you have anything else that you would like to add?
I have one more little shout out, which is also related to a little personal story that I did talk about in one of our previous episodes back when we were doing the podcast. The actor that plays young Picard is Marcus Nash, and I did meet Marcus at Star Trek Las Vegas. He's a very cool guy. He actually came up to our table when we were at Quarks, and he was going to all sorts of tables, and he was telling everybody that was actually his first Star Trek convention, this last one in August. And he came by. He was very nice. He introduced himself. Obviously, he looks different. He's got a beard. This picture here is pretty much the way that he looks now. So he didn't quite. He was, people weren't going to know who he was by looking at him. So, right. But he did. Obviously, this man played Picard. This is a man who actually got to play Picard. So this is pretty cool. And I did get to meet him. He was a very pleasant man. I just wanted to give him a shout out and talk about how I appreciate that. Not very few of the actors do that. Aaron Eisenberg was one of the actors that would do that, would go to Quarks and go to basically every table and say hi, which is just so cool. That's one of the special things about Quarks at the Star Trek Vegas. And Marcus did that as well. And I really appreciated it. He's a very nice person. I believe that he was actually promoting a film that he had directed. It says here that he is a writer and director known for little rituals. I can't remember if that was the film that he was talking about, but I know that he was talking about that he's kind of moved on into independent film and things like that. So I just wanted to give him a shout out. He is an actor who actually played Jean-Luc Picard.
Very cool. All right, so I think with that, we're probably good. So I want to do one more quick shout out here as we wrap up the episode. Definitely, if you're not familiar with Red Skirts, definitely visit redskirtsonline.com. That's the webcomic that I do with my friend Al Sparrow. If you like Star Trek, I think you'll really enjoy Red Skirts. It's a kind of a Star Trek parody, but as I stated earlier, it's more of a love letter to all the science fiction TV show and movies that a lot of us, hopefully, if you're of a certain age, you grew up watching and enjoying. Things from the 60s, the 70s, 80s, and a little bit of inspiration even from the 90s. So definitely check that out. We have a new page that's up. 2020 is going to be a big year for Red Skirts as we move forward, as we return to doing regular updates, as well as basically launching into a totally brand new story and continue to explore every corner of the Red Skirts universe. So I hope you'll definitely go over there and check out redskirtsonline.com today. Again, you can read the comic basically for free on the web. And hopefully we'll be doing Kickstarter soon, actually, for the first collected volume. Hopefully that'll be happening this year as well. So with that, I want to thank you for either watching or listening to this episode of the Retro Rogues Live. We hope that you've enjoyed another long story longer, as we like to do here on the show. We had an awful lot of fun things to talk about, whether it was the new Black Widow trailer, all the fun things coming out about Picard, all the fun different stories we cover, the pop culture news segment, as well as the streaming wars. And we've got another fun-filled episode coming up with hopefully a guest on our next episode. So definitely come back as we wrap up our lead up to the debut of Picard. So we hope you to join us. Again, my name is Dave Beatty, and I've been one of your hosts. You can learn more about me and see more of my work at my website. That's at davebeatty.com. That's www.davebeaty.com. And I want to thank my great co-host. This is Mr. Garrett Alexander for being here on the show. Please, Eric, tell the folks where they can learn more about you on the interwebs.
Well, I am most active on Twitter, and you can find me on Twitter at BASSGOD14, which you can also see in the bottom corner of my screen right there, BASSGOD14. Also, that's also what I use for my YouTube, which we're also streaming on that. And I use that for pretty much most of my social media, BASSGOD14.
Very cool. So definitely, we hope that you will join us next week as we have hopefully a special guest, another co-host, and we finish our wrap up to Picard.